RPG! 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 RPG!
Hello and good evening. Welcome, everyone, to the Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda. Excited to have you here tonight. I thought originally that I might have been going to Gen Con tonight. Mr. Stephen Glicker of Roll for Combat had all sorts of wonderful invites to all sorts of cool industry special get-togethers the day before Gen Con opens. But they didn't let me in any of them. So I said, he's like, "Are you still coming?" I said, "No, of course not. I'm not coming. I'm going to go Wednesday night like I always do." So my loss is your gain. Not really. I'm a little bit dreading this Gen Con experience. I am happy that I'm only going to be going for 2 days, and then I'm going to dip out just because I feel like I'm going to be overwhelmed by the time Saturday comes around. So yeah. In any case, we're sort of getting back into it. Obviously, Thursday, there will not be a stream, or at least there won't be a normal stream. Can't promise anything, but we'll be at Gen Con. We'll have stuff. Maybe we can throw something together there. Maybe a live stream from Gen Con is in the cards. I'm also, and I don't want to promise anything. Okay, I don't want to promise anything, but I may try to do some kind of special project at Gen Con, since I'm going there kind of as a civilian. Right. The last couple of years with the channel, when I go to these conventions, I'm kind of going as Derek from Knights of Last Call. But officially, Knights of Last Call is not going to Gen Con. I had said I wasn't going to go. I don't have a room or anything like that. I eventually decided that, well, look, if I don't bring all of my games and my role-playing games and my con bug-out bag, and I don't bring, all my audio recording equipment, if I don't bring any of that, if I just bring a backpack, then I could kind of go, as a incognito. And of course, I'll say hi to, the patrons and stuff, and anybody who's there and wants to say hello as well, more than welcome to say hi. But anyway, so since I don't have like the, at Origins and Gen Con, I was running games. I ran games of Shadow Dark. I ran games of Quiet Year. I ran games of, so like I've run games these last couple of years, and this year I'm not, because I'm not bringing anything. I don't have any time. So I got to do something with my time, right? And I'm obviously not signed up for any events. And even if I did sign up for events, I probably wouldn't have gotten into any of them, as so many people did. Miss out on events that they signed up for. But I didn't sign up for any events, and I really have not signed up for events for many years. So, I might find something else to do to occupy my time. We'll see. Yeah. Any case, so we put something out to the patrons tonight, and I asked them what they wanted to see, and I thought we were going to get some traction from King Hodop about DC 20, which we probably will cover at some point in the future. $2 million is hard to ignore. Obviously, there's a lot of people who feel like that game has a lot of promise and potential, so it's probably worth taking a look. But one of the patrons, true luminaries, Mr. Darth Gorlock, has had a post has had an option in the poll several times over the last couple of months. And that option, and it's always gotten a good amount of votes, but today it won. And what Darth Gorlock wanted to know is tips for running D&D outside of dungeons, city, wilderness, etc. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. As always with this channel, I have no idea where this conversation will go. And quite frankly, I didn't even think I was going to be streaming tonight. So I just put that poll up like a couple hours ago. I literally just made the thumbnail for this video 20 minutes ago. And so I don't have, a lot of times I have some prep that I'm able to do, a little bit of preparation, but not today. So today we're going to be flying seat of our pants. Who else is procrastinating on packing? I have not packed a thing. In fact, actually, just a few hours ago, I was going to run out in my car and do a couple errands, and my car battery was dead. So I tried to jump start it with my housemate's car. It failed to do so. So I then had to go take out my battery, go buy a new battery, and then come home and install that battery. So it's other things have pressed for my attention. So hello everybody, by the way, who's here. Let's see. Well, King Hodop is here. Jackal is here, but he's off to play co-op Starforge. Well, hope you have a better time than I did. I don't think it's a bad game. There was just something about it that, I don't know, maybe I was expecting something different. Maybe I've played too much PBTA, but it didn't grab me the way that I thought it might have. What is up, Roman? Hello, hello. Pepper, hello to you. Enders, what's up? Sarak, welcome. Wojo, hello, hello. Goldacat, a.k.a. Golduck, what's up, what's up? Lance giving out his, as always, what's up, George? What is up, Mr. Kyle? Solana, hello. Krister, welcome. Karima, hello. Karima says, that's the thing. The world is a dungeon. We'll talk a little bit about that. Lord Dragon, hello. Ken, William, Mark says, Woot, very self-sufficient. I mean, I'm a pretty handy guy overall. I mean, there's some things I won't do, but, you know, switching a battery is actually pretty easy, all things considered. And Gonza, good evening. Ooh, what's up? Dr. Metropolis.
DR Metropolis tipped $10. I just picked up Forgotten Lands. What a timely stream. As a ranger/hunter at heart, good wilderness rules are a godsend.
All right. Well, Dr. Metropolis, I'm definitely going to bring up Forbidden Lands tonight. In both ways that I think it does it very well, and I think ways that maybe it could do it better. As a contrast to Dungeons and Dragons, D20, Pathfinder 2, that kind of thing. In particular, because number one, I think that game itself, is advertised as being very focused on the wilderness exploration component of the game, but also I've been playing it. I've been running that game, Forbidden Lands campaign, the last couple of months. We're about 10 or 11 sessions in, and so I have a pretty good experience with that. So, what's up, Mike T? Hello, hello. Yes, the curse strikes again. It keeps coming, buddy. The hits keep coming, and they don't stop coming. So at some point, I'm sure we'll bust out the whiteboard. I don't, again, I'm just going to be kind of, again, no real plan tonight, unfortunately. So if you do have questions, if you do have comments, go ahead and drop them in the chat. You know me. I got my teleprompter right here. I'm reading the chat as I'm talking to you. And of course, if you want to throw a little tip or super chat my way, the Gen Con Food and Fun Fund super chat. If you want to do it to the Gen Con RPG Fund, I'll make that a tip. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to be buying this year. Like I said, I'm going to be going as a civilian, so we'll see. I'm definitely going to be picking up Techno Fantasy Atlas at Need Games. It's going to be one of my first locations. In fact, I think all of the KOLC people who have a KOLC shirt are going to be basically stacking up on the right side of the hall and trying to go straight to Need Games to try to get Techno Fantasy. I have no idea. That'll probably be completely unnecessary. I'm sure they have plenty, but we'll see. All right. So before we get into any sort of tips and advice, I want to first say something, which is, and this may really surprise you, but part of the problem is that Dungeons and Dragons, with the name like Dungeons and Dragons. Now I get it. We've said this a lot. The game has changed a lot, but in some ways it hasn't changed at all. And Dungeons and Dragons, first and foremost, is a game that is built around the dungeon. The rules, the mechanics, the pacing, the tension, the DNA itself of the game is inherently tied to the dungeon. And part of the reason why things like wilderness adventures and ocean-going adventures and city adventures can oftentimes feel like they fall flat is usually because of, in my experience, sort of two main problems. I guess we're going to go to the whiteboard here. All right. There we go. Boom. All right. So there we go. So why, and I'm just going to use the term like, so I'll say, why do non-dungeon adventures fall flat? Right. And I think, oftentimes they do. They do fall flat. And I think it comes down to two main problems. The first problem is lack of mechanics. So, and this starts to get to Forbidden Lands, as I said before, but by and large, the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, D&D games are inherently tied to dungeons. A lot of the abilities of these classes are tied to dungeons. A lot of the spells are tied to dungeons. And with the exception of obviously combat stuff, most of these games treat anything other than dungeon exploration as sort of a barrier, a hurdle to be overcome. And so a lot of times when you do get mechanics for non-dungeons, it's usually what I would call a shortcut mechanic. It's basically a way of saying, the game is saying, we know you don't like this stuff, so what we're going to do is we're going to give you a mechanic to skip over it, right? One of the classic examples of this, and this is true in a variety of editions of D&D, by the way, is the Ranger. And the Ranger is this, wilderness class. And if you're, in some small part, if you're choosing the Ranger, it's because you want to engage with these wilderness mechanics. But a lot of times the mechanics that they give these characters is basically you kind of just automatically ignore or otherwise completely trivialize that portion of the game. And so in a weird twist, by choosing to be a Ranger, you've actually made the wilderness less interesting. You've made it less special. You've made it easier for you just to bypass and to skip. And that's for a lot of games in this vein. Wilderness rules, traveling rules, basically come down to you can move 30 miles a day or 15 miles in difficult terrain. And that's about it, right? There's like, at least when you think about like all the rules and all the mechanics for combat and for dungeon exploration, you're searching for secret doors, you're looking for traps, you're in combat, you're trying to set up flanks, or you're trying to, tactically position yourself. All of those interesting mechanical choices are oftentimes very lacking in these, non-dungeon games. All right. Yeah. So now, let's see here. Full Metal Dragon says that they want a shirt. We've got extra Full Metal Dragon. They just cost tickets from our Patreon. Mechanics do exist. Iron Kingdoms, Runes of Symbaroum. I don't know those. Lord of the Rings, I do know. And we could talk a little bit about Lord of the Rings and the Journey rules. I think they're pretty good. I don't know the Lord of the Rings. I think Lord of the Rings, right, is the one from Free League. I'm familiar with Adventures in Middle-earth, which I think was from Cubicle 7 for 5e for the Lord of the Rings IP. And they're interesting. They're good. I mean, there's some interesting things there to definitely to dive in there. So you will probably mention it, but the Perilous Wilds is a good resource. You mean this one that's already pulled up? Yeah. Okay. So, so Stan actually, in a not so, I mean, I know he's being kind of funny, but he's actually hitting the nail right on the head. He says, lol, they should make fighter features that let you bypass combat. That's exactly right. This would be like a fighter being like, oh, I'm really good at fighting, so I'm going to have a fighter in the party, and that's going to allow me to just bypass the combat, right? Because we don't want to deal with it. We want to get to the good stuff. Now, what's funny is there's a lot of people out there these days where D&D is not about the fighting. It's not about the wilderness exploration, right? It's about the creative storytelling. It's about the in-character role-playing. It's about, all these moments. Who might actually say, I would actually prefer if, the fighter or whatever had an ability that just says, okay, we don't have to worry about the fighting anymore. So there's lack of mechanics that a lot of these games have. And again, there may be some more, but there may be some 5e, exemptions to this, but by and large, a lot of these D20, D&D, Pathfinder 2 don't really have mechanics. And when they do have mechanics, okay, they either lack mechanics or when they do have them, okay, they bypass rather than engage. And I think that is a kind of a sad, unfortunate, effect, kind of randomly here, but like in Dragonbane, there's this, in Dragonbane, there's a thing called like fearless, and you take it and then your character becomes immune to fear. And that's cool, but it's also kind of weird because now it's like, you're not even interacting with that mechanic anymore. It's just completely not part of the game. And I think there's a part for a lot of us that don't want to just become immune to the mechanic that we want to engage with, right? We want to get better at it. We want to maybe have more options available to us, more choices, better choices. But we don't want to just basically make it auto win, right? Or make ourselves immune to it. I don't think that's as fun. So a lot of these games struggle with the lack of mechanics. Now, I said that there would be a second one, and we will get to it, but this is kind of like tangent number one, which is, there's lack of mechanics. When they bypass rather than engage. Mike T!
Make it tip $10. Be aware that it could be your alternator. If the new car battery dies again really quickly, it's a sign that it's not getting charged while the engine is running.
It's a good point, Mike. I don't really know. Is there a easy way to test if your alternator is bad? I don't know. I don't have a battery tester, so I can't really test my own battery. Maybe I should have gotten one of those. Mike, thank you for the advice. That's good advice. Well, it's just a little scary, Mike, because I'm about to drive my car to Indianapolis tomorrow. So, I mean, I guess it's good that I got a brand new battery today, I suppose. But thank you, Mike. That's very, very generous of you. Thank you. And good advice. Damien coming in. Advanced 5e's main goal was to put these mechanics back in. Now, as you know, Damien, as you often espouse this, I have not dug into Advanced 5e. I will say, a lot of times when games purport to have mechanics that engage with these mechanics, they are oftentimes bad. So while their goal may have been to put these mechanics in, I don't know. I don't know if they succeeded. I'm not going to say that they didn't, because I haven't looked at it, but I will say that these are really tough mechanics to deal with. And again, we're kind of go off on a tangent here, but thank you, Damien. I appreciate you. The part of this, so, part of the reason for this is it's on purpose. You see, you have to this is where I talk about like the DNA of the game and how the games have changed, okay? And how they've evolved. So once upon a time, when you were sitting down to play Dungeons and Dragons, okay, your goal was to get loot. This was the quintessential goal of the game. And remember, it's back, a lot of people think it's backwards. A lot of people think of it backwards, but the answer, which is, at this time in the game, you got 1 XP, right, for every gold piece of treasure and value and booty that you, took home to the town, to the dungeon, right? So a lot of people go, oh, okay, right. So people wanted XP, right? And people wanted to level up, right? So that's why they went and got treasure. But actually, it's the opposite. Now, granted, that may have eventually evolved that way because people became obsessed with numbers and powers go burr. But originally the idea was that Gary Gygax was like, well, people are going to they're going to want to go find treasure, because these are all people that grew up reading, Conan the Barbarian and Fraud and the Grey Mouser. So these characters didn't think in terms of level and experience, right? Their goal was to find lucre, right? To find booty, to find loot. And so, when Gary Gygax made his Dungeons and Dragons game, naturally the assumption was that these characters were going to want to find treasure. They were going to want to find piles of gold and potentially magical items. So the goal of the characters, the goal of the players, right, and the characters was find treasure. And so Gary Gygax was like, well, since that's their goal, then I should reward them with experience points for doing the thing that they want to go do anyways. So it's actually, experience kind of, came second, because Gary was like, well, that's what they're going to do anyways. And I want to reward them for, following their instincts and following their treasure. So loot was the name of the game, and you wanted to get treasure. Now, where was the best place to find a treasure, to find loot? Okay. Well, you already know the answer to that. Inside a dungeon. Dungeons is where you found treasure, is where you found loot.
Metropolis tipped $5. I feel like 4E had decent rules for travel. Using healing surges as you travel. The Dark Sun campaign book added the supplies mechanic and survival days currency as well.
Yeah, so 4E I think was okay. I think Dark Sun, Dr. Metropolis, did do a better job with survival days. And we could definitely talk about that as well, because this will get kind of into the Forbidden Lands thing. And it also get into an issue of resources, which we will definitely focus on and talk about. And the key thing there is that 4E understood that as long as you had a currency of resource that the party cared about and it was limited, then you could at least make those decisions in treasure, in exploration, more interesting. So people wanted to go to dungeons, because dungeons is where you were going to get loot and treasure. And why is that exactly? Well, remember that part of the way that the treasure tables were set up in original D&D is that if you just encountered a random encounter, okay, the treasure that you got from those monsters was very, very, very little. And you almost got no experience points for fighting the monsters themselves. So you didn't get any experience for really fighting the monster. They had crap treasure, so you really got nothing for that fight, which meant you wanted to avoid that fight as much as you possibly could. What you wanted to find were creatures' lairs, okay? You wanted to find their vaults. You wanted to find their hoards, all right? And that meant going to where they lived, which was, by definition, a dungeon. That's where monsters live. That's where goblins live. Or this is before goblins and orcs and stuff were people. Everything was just a monster. And so when you went to the dungeon, you might still encounter monsters, but randomly, and they might still have crap treasure, but you could also find their lair. You could find their real treasure, the real loot. Okay. And that's what it was. It was in the dungeon. And then, of course, the goal is to then get your loot and treasure back to town where you can spend it and you can level up and do all these fun things. What this means is that from a play pattern perspective, anything in between here and here, right, is just a pain in the ass. It's not an exciting journey of adventure. It's me going to Indianapolis tomorrow, and I have to drive 5.5 hours on the highway. That's not an exciting adventure. That sucks, right? I just want to get to Indy, right? I want to go to the con hall. The con hall is the dungeon. The treasure and the loot is the awesome new RPGs that are there, right? The journey between the town and the dungeon is a pain in the ass. It's a hurdle. It's an obstacle. It's not really supposed to be fun or interesting. It's a grind. And in fact, worse than that, when you're traveling from between the town and the dungeon, you might encounter a dangerous monster or a band of roving humanoids. And you might die, or you might get really messed up before you even get to the dungeon. And remember, by definition, these creatures aren't in their lair, so the treasure is crap. So, and it's worse than that, because at least in the old school days, when you did encounter creatures outside of the dungeon, you fought more of them. So instead of fighting, 8 or 9 orcs, there might be 40 or 50 orcs. So then you have to run away. It's this whole thing. So the whole concept of the journey, okay, was actually it was a pain in the ass. It was kind of like a price that you had to pay in order to go get to the good stuff that you actually wanted to go do, which was go to the dungeon. So what this means is that as D&D evolved through first edition and second edition, and probably even into third edition and fourth and fifth and whatever Pathfinder and D20 in general, a lot of the abilities and the mechanics that came about because they were like, look, nobody wants to do this stuff. This is the stuff that people want to skip. They want to get to the good stuff. And at that time, this phase of the game was very dangerous, and it was very prone to problems. And so when you gained abilities to move quickly, bypass the encounters, have your ranger get you through this wilderness area with minimal difficulty or effort. Maybe you had a wizard who could cast Shadow Walk, or your wizard could cast eventually Teleport. This was all considered like a reward by the game, because it was basically saying, hey, look, you get to skip the part that sucks. So part of the reason why the game never really created mechanics for this is because this part of the game was kind of supposed to be, in my personal opinion, an obstacle. It was kind of something that you wanted to skip, right? Now, I'm being overly generous here because, there are obviously exceptions to this and things do change. But by and large, this is kind of true for most things, which is, in a lot of adventures, in a lot of situations with you and your folks, okay? And I think this is really, really important, okay? And this is starting to get into my second point, which we'll get to here in a little while. But, okay, exploration, I won't say is fun. I'll say it can be fun. Okay? Journeys rarely are. So one of the key problems that I think a lot of people have with wilderness, oceans, cities is you, whether you know it or not, are putting that city or wilderness or forest or mountain or whatever, you're putting it in as an obstacle. You're putting it in as a hurdle between where the party is and where the party wants to go, or where the party needs to go. Okay? And so what you've created here is a journey. And a journey is something that people ideally, or would preferably, would skip, right? Because if I had the ability, if Derek had the ability to teleport to Indianapolis tomorrow, I would do that, okay? I'm not exploring my way to Indianapolis tomorrow. I'm journeying there. And what I want to do is in Indianapolis. And everything that I want, and anything that happens to me along the way to get to Indianapolis is a pain in my ass. So, in D&D terms, right, I don't want to have random encounters. I want to have 0 encounters, right? I don't want to have anything happen to me. I just want to be able to drive and get there. I don't want the random encounter. A lot of people go, I'm going to make the journey more interesting. I'm going to add this random encounter table. Okay, you hit traffic. You have a blowout on the car, on the highway. You run low on gas. That's not interesting. That's annoying. That's not anything I can really engage with. It's just annoying. And so when you give those players mechanics that let them just bypass that completely, okay, then that feels like a win, right? that feels like a win because you're saying, look, normally when you make the drive to Indy once an hour, you have to roll on this random encounter table because it's a pain in the ass. But luckily, the person driving, he's the driver class, and he has a mechanical ability that lets you ignore those. And you're like, oh, thank God. This is going to be great. We won't have to deal with any of this, and we can just get there. So, so journeys, in my experience, rarely are fun. They are they're more of a trial. They're more of an obstacle. And that in itself isn't so bad, right? Kind of what combat is, right? Right. Very rarely is combat I'm going there to murder these people. I mean, sometimes that is the case, but that's what you're there for. But most of the time, great combats, monsters and things in your way are there as obstacles between you and what you actually want to get. I mean, even when you play an MMO, right? Like, do you really want to kill Ragnaros? Not really. You just want his loot. You want his stuff. The fact that you have to kill him and all of his minions and stuff before you get there is because those are obstacles in the way. So why isn't this different? Well, it is the case for some people, but for most people, it's not, because the games give us a ton of interesting mechanics, all right, that let us interact with combat. People don't want to skip combat. They want to lean into combat. And so when you take mechanics that make you better at combat, it's because it's an obstacle, but it's one that's engaging because it has a lot of mechanics, Now, Callimachus says, depends on how you handle it. Journeys are a great excuse to role play and bonding. Unlike your voyage to Indianapolis, the party has each other. So, number one, it is interesting how I understand what you're saying, and I think that you're right. But I do think it's interesting that's like that you need a journey. I mean, obviously there's like a Fabula Ultima component here. But it's interesting that we think about this in terms of we need an excuse to role play because we're in the journey phase, and we have an excuse to bond because we're in the journey phase. When one would think that you would be able to have these moments throughout. That being said, that is a fine solution because what you are doing is you're pacing the game, right? And typically, I was on the wrong thing here. Typically, when you have, an exciting, right? You have some sort of exciting scene, right? Maybe full of combat and the party barely escapes with their lives, right? And now they have to travel. They have to travel to the next exciting thing. And part of what, pacing is all about is the idea that this tension, the excitement, you want this dip before you get back to the next exciting thing. So, here, this is your journey. So now is not the time to, make it extreme. Now is not the time. Most people see this as an opportunity to sort of catch their breath, to catch up on things. And so if this is a phase where you introduce those role-playing moments and bonding moments, that can feel like a natural fit because, there's sort of a lull in the action. Also, and or additionally, historically, if you've ever gone on a long car ride with, any of your buddies or loved ones, or hiked or something, journeys are usually very boring. And when a journey is very boring, you tend to just, shoot the shit. So I don't think that idea is bad, but I also just think that, the answer shouldn't just be, well, they're really boring and we should just role play and talk about how much, we're friends. I don't know that that's a winning combination either. Tim says, I always thought part of progression was getting to skip the wilderness. Wizards get teleport exactly when they're supposed to for game power-up. Congrats, you've graduated past mundane travel. And that's exactly right, Tim. It's the same thing. D&D is ripe with this, and you see it all over the place. When the game first starts, right, walking anywhere is dangerous. Now I'm talking about like old school D&D. You can see why this is going to be completely shit out in a second. Walking anywhere is dangerous. Light and torches, torches are a pain in the ass. Food and water are a pain in the ass. And, your character has to keep track of all these things. So just to get to the dungeon, you've got to travel, you've got to walk, you have to have all these difficulties, you have to have light and torches when you're traveling in the dungeon, you have to have food and water. But then in original D&D, it wasn't a 0th level cantrip that you could cast infinite times per day. But by the time that your cleric reached 5th level or 7th level, they would start to have spells like create food and water. Or, you would have access to spells like eventually, like teleport or, overland flight or shadow walk. And of course, for light, you eventually, you get access to the light spell or the, daylight spell. So, and of course, there's also magic items that do something similar, a continual torch, right? And the reason that they gave you those things is because the game basically said, do you really want to keep doing this? Do you really want to keep having to deal with all of these annoyances? No, you're powerful now. You're leveled up. You have the spells. You have the technology. You have the magic items. You have the class features. We can skip all this, right? And we can get to the next thing. We can get to the next area of the game. It's kind of like, again, video games, very smart, obviously. It's a many, multi-billion dollar industry. They make you travel to that new location on the map exactly once. And then once you're there, now you can just fast travel, right? You can fast travel back to where you've been before. You can fast travel to the place where you were, because they're not going to keep making you make that same journey over and over and over again, because at that point it becomes dull. It becomes tedious. And again, if your goal is that you are trying to get somewhere, then it's not exploration, right? It's a journey. And the wilderness or the ocean or anything in between is just an obstacle that you're trying to overcome. Now, that doesn't mean overcoming an obstacle can't be fun, right? So combat is an obstacle, but combat can be fun. Well, why is that? And that's because of, this is kind of getting into the second reason, which is player agency. Part of the reason that combat is so fun, part of the reason that the dungeons are so fun, is because the players have a lot of choices to make and a lot of decisions to make. And, do you go left or do you go right? Do you attack the spellcaster or do you deal with his ogre bodyguards first? Should you heal the wizard or should you heal the fighter? So these are all really interesting decisions. You're constantly making them. And there's a lot of mechanical support for making those decisions. I think part of the biggest problem with most these games that people run is there's not a lot of decisions to be made when you are outside of a dungeon, when you're outside of a combat. When you're in wilderness, when you're traveling, there really isn't a whole lot for you to do, right? Think about what it really feels like. You're going to go, okay, we're going to go from this hex to the next hex. A GM might roll a random encounter. What choices are you making? What decisions are you doing? Very, very few in most games. And so you feel like we're basically kind of just sitting here and we're just watching the GM roll random stuff and seeing what might happen. And then when it does happen, then we have to react to it. So that's not agency, right? That's reactivity. That's passivity, right? And rightfully so, because we're not trying to explore. We're not trying to do anything. We're just trying to get where we're going. So, and a lot of GMs will say, well, okay, well, I'll make it harder to get where they're going. That'll make it more interesting. That doesn't really work either, because now you've just made that whole part of the game much more annoying and much more unpleasant to deal with. So giving players choices, I think, makes the game a much more interesting decision. But that can be very difficult and that can be very challenging, because in order to do that, you have to have a robust set of challenges, mechanics, choices that can all dictate, how and where and what and why the players are going to do what they're going to do. So as an example, like in the simplest example, you've got the town. The players are trying to get to the dungeon. Okay. Do you take the forest or do you take the mountain pass? Now, it may not seem like a lot, but believe it or not, this is already sort of better than most people's wilderness trips, because a lot of times when they're doing wilderness trips, right, you're doing something like an adventure or whatever, and they have this path that the players have to follow, and it's just really obnoxious and really boring. Now, of course, keep in mind that people want to, in a certain sense, they want to avoid these encounters, as much as possible. So the players, right, they don't want to engage with these parts of the element because they want to go to the dungeon. Well, in this case, the dungeon is the Mines of Moria, right? Shit, we got Moria here. So the mountain pass fails, so they go to Moria instead. And of course, the dungeon is Mount Doom. Well, I guess in this case, the dungeon is Lothlorien. So giving people choices is difficult, but it's absolutely critical and essential. And this is one of the reasons why I think journeying can be really difficult, but exploration can be really fun. So, a lot of people they don't even really necessarily understand what they're talking about here, but, they'll say, I'm going to use hexploration. And, what my game is a hexploration game. Okay. Is there anything to find? If not, like if the players start off, okay, in this hex, and you're like, okay, the goal is, and the players are trying to get to, the dungeon, the Tower of the Dark Lord, or whatever they're trying to get to. And either maybe they know where it is and they need to get there, or maybe they don't know where it is and they're just looking for it. Looking for stuff isn't the same thing as exploration either. Additionally, one of the biggest problems that people have with hexploration, or at least I have with hexploration, is it can feel completely and totally arbitrary, right? Which direction you go. You just kind of say, let's go east. Let's go east. Let's go east. Like, you're not really making any sort of decisions. You're not really engaging with any sort of choice. Because remember, in order to have player agency, you have to be able to make decisions, but you also have to be able to be informed. So I think, and this is what I've learned. So again, this is a very long way. I didn't have any time to prep this. What I have learned from my Forbidden Lands campaign, and actually let me bring it up if you will all indulge me, because we play in person, but we do have one player who is remote, so we're sort of a in-person hybrid. But additionally, I have a TV up at the game table that I use as sort of a display screen, and what I display on it is the map that the party is engaging on. And furthermore, it allows the remote player to log into Foundry, and then they can see what everybody else is seeing. Let me see here. Beowulf says, yeah. Hey, meaning yeah. Exploration and journeys are very different. Journeys are when the group has a specific destination in mind. Exploration is just walking through terrain and seeing what's there, but no real destination. I think that's I think that's true, but I also think it is dangerous. And I think that that's part of the problem. When exploration becomes we're just wandering around, that can feel very aimless. Again, this might just be to me, but as a player and a GM, the whole let's just wander around the map of blank hexes until something interesting happens feels very boring to me. It feels very unengaging, and it feels very uninspired, and it feels like it has nothing going on to it. Yeah. Now, Open World Attic also makes a great point. Journeys can be fun in real life and even in video games if there's some beautiful views to see along the way and maybe even snap a lot of pictures. However, in TTRPGs where a GM has to describe everything, then it's not so much fun. Now, I will contrast this a little bit. I do think, I guess this is a pre-tip, but like, I think that, good visuals can go a long way. So, it may be that journeys and adventures through the wilderness end up feeling more like a montage sequence. And again, let's be very clear about this, right? When most of the Lord of the Rings is a series of journeys, and usually those journeys are represented by some sort of sweeping helicopter shot with the Fellowship theme building in the background, some really long establishing shot, seeing our heroes triumphantly crest a hill. It's a montage sequence. It's a montage sequence with a few brief character building moments in between and then encounters, right? So giving a good visual, well, not maybe as, picture's worth 1,000 words, but I think that as a GM, if you want to tweak your prose a little bit and sort of lean into something, I think that can be really cool. It doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be paragraphs upon paragraphs upon paragraphs. It should be very like, just, give them that moment to appreciate it. And in a narrative sense, asking players to add some details, like what is something, what's a unique animal or unique plant that you notice, right? So that I think goes a long way. One of the first RPGs was run by Stephen Hawking. Each player was an official in a French town in World War I that was going to be attacked. Players loved it. Are you sure Stephen Hawking was there? Because it sounds like you're describing Braunstein, but I thought Braunstein was done by Wellesley, Dave Wellesley, not Stephen Hawking. But what you're describing sounds like Braunstein. And I thought it was Napoleon era. But yeah, I could be wrong. Thank you for the super chat, Cal. So again, let me pull this up here. Okay. So, oh geez, that's big. All right. So here is cut off my head. Here is my Forbidden Lands game. And I'm using a couple modules here, but the way that, and this is the problem that I had with the game. It is a big map, but I mean, this is the whole campaign, but it's not as big as you think it is because players can move like four or five hexes a day. So, it can actually travel pretty well. Now we've been playing for, like I said, for 10 sessions. And this is basically what they have managed to explore. And you can actually see that this is actually the PC's stronghold, which they built, Halvard's Ferry. But when you play Forbidden Lands in person, the players get a map that looks like this, right? It's a bunch of these hexes, and scattered throughout these hexes are these different locations which clearly show you, hey, here's where a adventure site is. And in Forbidden Lands terms, an adventure site can be like a castle. It can be like a town. Okay, there's another adventure site, a town. Or it could be like a dungeon. So those are the three adventure sites: dungeons, castles, and towns. But when you play normal Forbidden Lands, all of this stuff is just visible on the map. And so the players, in a sense, are just heading towards this, they already know that there's an adventure site right here, right? They know that there is a castle there. And so they are walking towards that castle because that's where they want to go. Now, that could be fine, but then that starts to feel like a journey. And that's where the players want to go. So every day when you're having the players, go hex by hex by hex by hex, it becomes very boring. So what I did for this game, now this is, to be fair, this is something that you can only do online, but I think part of the reason it works is the alternative, what a lot of people will do when they play Forbidden Lands online or a game like this online or any sort of exploration game is they will actually make the entire map blank, right? The map will be completely blank except for the hex that you're in or the hex that you've explored. And so the map would just be like an endless sea of gray of empty hexes, and then it wouldn't be explored until you go there. But see, I think that's problematic too, because I think the problem there is there's no texture. There's no context. And context is everything. And the reason why I say that is because the way that this map works is somebody made a black and white version, or maybe they just made a version of the map and I turned it black and white. They made a version of the Forbidden Lands map. It doesn't have any labels. It doesn't have any of the castles or dungeons or towns marked. It's just the geographical features. All right. Now, that is an overlay on top of the actual hex grid. So, this hex type grid, right, is the cases where the players have actually gone and been. But up here, this is all unexplored area. But why this is so cool is because when the group is standing over here, they can look at this map. They can have this moment and go, there's this big, huge forest to the west. But in the middle of it is this like remote, isolated mountain range. Boy, it'd be cool to go explore there. It would be cool to find out what's over there. We don't know what's over there, but we do have a sort of a quasi-quantum destination in mind. We're not just marching off in a random direction on a completely blank map full of endless gray hexes with no context to any of the decisions that we're making. Instead, they don't know what's necessarily here. There may be town. In fact, one of the things that my players have really enjoyed is looking at this map and making guesses. Like, look at this river, and then it enters into this small lake. I bet there's got to be maybe a town or a castle, maybe located near one of these river entrances to the lake. It feels like that would make sense. A strategic location, a valuable merchant location. We should go over there and check it out just to see. And linking back to the mechanics of the game, what gets rewarded gets repeated. In Forbidden Lands, you get 1 experience point per session for showing up. That's it, 1 XP. By the way, things usually cost 5 or 10 or 15 XP to like get another skill improvement, or 3 or 6 or 9 XP to get a new feat, basically. You get 1 XP for showing up. You also get an XP if you explore a hex that you've never been to before. So great, okay, cool reason. That's a good reason for exploring. But you also get an experience point if you discover a new adventure site. That's a castle, that's a town, that's a dungeon. So the players, not only are they interested, like, whoa, I wonder what cool town is here, or maybe what cool dungeon is here. By the way, they could be wrong. But part of the reason they also want to engage is because they want to get the experience point. So they are getting a reward in the game for seeking out these sites, but also, these castles and dungeons, right? That's the cool, that's the cool part of the game. That's where the really fun, exciting encounters are and the really cool treasure. So naturally, they want to go to those places. And, as you kind of, and like their whole world has really just been this part of the map. And it's one of those things, one of my favorite, this is a complete aside, one of my favorite moments in video games was when I first played World of Warcraft. And I don't know, I had been playing EverQuest and EverQuest 2, but like those games seem very small. And I remember I started off as a gnome or a dwarf. So I was in Dunmorog, and I was in that little, I call it like a mini zone, right? Cold Ridge Valley, I think is what it's called. It's like the starting area. And I thought that was a zone. It felt huge to me, right? I'm in this little tiny area, and I've got to walk over and kill some ice trolls, and I got to go kill some bears. And then finally they're like, okay, you're level 5 or whatever. Now you can head up the road and start heading towards Ironforge. And you walk out, and then you realize, oh my God. And I think at the time, I don't know if that happens, but I think the map changes, and you just see how small the little area that you've been playing in is compared to this whole zone. And that was like a really powerful moment for me, because it gave me this sense of the scale and the size that does happen of the world. And you realize this whole gigantic map, and I've been playing here for what feels like forever, but I've probably only been playing here for hours. I've only explored this tiny little valley in one part of the map. And there's this whole huge map awaiting me to discover. And there's all these other zones outside of that. Like it made me feel very small. And it made me excited to find out what else was in this world. And so my players are very focused on this is the view of the map that they've really been looking at. But there's this moment where you can scroll back and just go, wow, like there's so much to see and so much to do and so much to go. And, we'd love to, what is this? What is this ancient city that is, in the edges of the mountains? We've heard rumors of an ancient dwarven city. Is this it? Again, this ancient forest with these mountain peaks. What lies, to the north in these fog shrouded vales beyond the great woods? What is this, lake here in the north? And what are these islands, right? There's just so much stuff that is, kind of calling to you in a certain way. And while you don't know exactly what's there, it gives you this sense of purpose. And that's why I think that, this has been so effective, is because this style allows the players to have a good idea, they have some idea of where they're going and why they might want to go there. But it's not a mandatory thing. They don't have to do it. There's not like, well, the moment you say, okay, the adventure fetch quests wants you to go here. Once you say that, the game is no longer an exploration game. The game is, how do we get from there to there along these hexes as quickly as possible with minimal interruptions so that we can go complete our quest? And at that point, the journey feels kind of like a pain in the ass. Whereas when the party is out trying to find new adventure sites or which by the way gives them experience points, but also to sort of answer those questions like, people have talked about this. Like, well, so example, and I'll give you, this is a great example. They have recently ventured into the ancient crumbling fortress of Weatherstone, and they have recovered a fair amount of gold and silver. The first time in the campaign that they actually have had real money. And they're like, oh shit, we can actually do stuff now. We can actually buy stuff. So they took their money and they traveled back to their stronghold of Halvard's Ferry, which is this remote fortress, which they built, by the way. This was not there. This used to just be a ferry house, but they built a wall and they built a guard tower out of logs and wood. And they basically said, all right, let's go buy all our stuff. Bob was like, let's go buy our stuff. And Smith's like, Bob, they don't have anything here. This is our stronghold. It has like a couple of guys who, run the ferry boat and their wives who make bread and stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, that's right. And they were saying, we want to get some other stuff for our stronghold. We want to maybe get some guards and hire them. But also I want to buy better armor and I want to buy better weapons. And so the group said, well, we know from talking with NPCs over the course of the campaign, and they have brought stuff to Halvard's Ferry from the river. We know that the river heads out to the sea. And we know that those merchant people are trading with someone or something out there. I bet, this is the group talking, I bet there's a number of towns or cities along the coast. And so next session, we should go downriver and we should start exploring the coast because we want to find those cities. We want to make contact. We want to maybe find a place where we can find a trainer or find a teacher to help you spend our experience points more efficiently so we can find merchants and towns that we can spend our money to acquire better goods and better gear. So they're driven by this purpose. If this was not here, if this map wasn't here, if this was just solid gray, I think it wouldn't be as inspiring. And I don't think it would work as well. So I have really liked this approach for wilderness exploration. Dr. Metropolis coming in with $5.
Metropolis tipped $5. Seeing this map makes me want to run a Dark Sun hex crawl using this Fog of War and the Survival Day rules. Such a great setting to make exploration fun and dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, right? I think exploration needs to have a balance. Now, someone mentioned Perilous Wilds. I brought up on the PDF. Perilous Wilds is very smart because Perilous Wilds understands that the key to a good overland exploration, and by the way, this is true for a city as well, is discoveries and dangers, which is what Perilous Wilds calls them. A discovery is something that is interesting, potentially even beneficial. It doesn't necessarily have to be like treasure or something, but it's something that the party gets excited about because they're like, oh, this could be something that helps us. This could be something that pays a dividend. And then dangers are anything that, left unhandled could cause problems. Could be monsters, but it could also be weather or storms or anything of the like. And I think a lot of people in a lot of games make the mistake of just focusing on dangers. Dangers. And when you do that, the wilderness feels very dangerous. And maybe that's even appropriate. Maybe that's even the correct way to do it. Because in real life, that's probably more realistic that you just go walking in the woods. You're not going to discover some ancient, elven ruins. No, you're just going to discover, I don't know, ticks and bears and snakes. But that doesn't necessarily make for a fun game, right? So I think striking that balance between dangers and discoveries is really critical. And so even in a game like Dark Sun, where it's very easy to understand the dangers, but you got to make sure that those discoveries are there, that the incentives are there. I mean, put it another way. If you're playing a typical D20 game, right, you can get why are you playing? Well, I mean, whatever. You want to do things and interact with the world, but mechanically, you're there to get experience points and level up. You could do that anywhere. If your characters were, if your characters were chilling in the town of Freygrove, and you could go earn experience points and level up next door with none of this wilderness encounters and all these problems and all these dangers and all these discoveries, but you could just go here and level up. You could just go here and get your experience points, or you could go all the way down here and get the same experience points and get the same, leveling up. Why would you ever go down here? And, someone might say, well, the treasure is better down here. Yeah, except no, it's not, because, the treasure has to be CR balanced. And if you don't get the right treasure, your character is going to be behind the curve. So even if you just go next door, the treasure's going to have to be there eventually, Let me catch up with chat here. Gonza says, I was not wrong. This is describing Secrets of Blackmore. It was Dave Wesley. All right. Yeah. Sweet. Awesome. Mind Blown says, one of my favorite Forbidden Lands moments was a random encounter in a blank hex where they met an orc in a watchtower that yelled insults and spat at the players. There's something to be said about weird and unique things that happen as well. Some people enjoy that sort of randomness, that chaoticness, and which is fine to a certain extent. But again, I think there's something to be said about encounters. I said discoveries and I said dangers, but there's something really compelling about encounters that could go either way, right? This could be an opportunity or it could go really bad. What it comes down to is what decisions do the players make and what skills or what mechanics do they have? Can they turn this kind of encounter beneficial, or is it going to go south on them? And I think that's really compelling and really interesting as well. So Casey says, yeah, let me see the massive mountain in the distance with strange luminescent crystals. A gray map of nothingness is boring. Give me a reason to care. And I completely agree. Like the maps need texture. Trying to give someone a blank map, whether you're hexploring or not, I think is a recipe for disaster. I know that there are people out there that probably really enjoy that, but I have tried to run a lot of hex crawls in my game day. And I got to be honest with you, they have all failed, mostly. I mean, maybe they succeeded just because people really liked playing D&D or whatever. But in my experience, they have all failed. This has been the most successful, and I'll say this with a caveat, though. This has been the most successful wilderness exploration game that we have ever had. And I say that with an asterisk, because there was another game that also did exploration, and my players really engaged with it. And it kind of broke all the rules, which was, and Smith has talked about this, Bob and Smith have both talked about this at length on our studio streams. We ran a campaign using Pathfinder 1 for Bob, and we ran it in Rapanathuk, the special collector's edition. In particular, we used the sort of new starting area of Zelkor's Ferry. And in this case, we used what I'll call diegetic exploration. So what does that mean? It means the players didn't have Google Maps. Okay. The players didn't have a hex grid. The players didn't have a satellite imagery of where they were on the world map. There was no world map. There was no hex grid. The instructions, they didn't go, oh, travel 24 miles and then turn due south and travel 14.2 miles before you travel due west another 5.6 miles, and then you'll arrive at your destination on the right. That doesn't exist in any sort of context of a fantasy game. Instead, they were told, take the old Hunter's Trail out of town, follow it to the river, turn south, and follow the river until it forks. Keep to the west, keep to the left bend, and keep going straight. And when you get to the area with the pine trees, you know you're nearby where you're trying to get. And they ended up drawing maps, but it was drawn on a piece of paper with random scribbles and directions. And there was no sense of a party marker, moving around the map, because I didn't give them. I had a map. I had a map with complete and total fidelity. The players, the overland experience was only in their mind. It was only in their theater of the mind. And that could be very scary as well, but it was really effective.
Lollipop Candy tip $10, just dropping little support. I am like 3 streams behind, so I'll be catching the VOD. I hope you meet Emma at the Need Games booth.
Oh, I'm definitely going to meet Emma. Lollipop. You know what? I got one. I got a high fantasy. I got a Techno Fantasy Atlas with your name on it, buddy. Let me. Like I said, I'm gonna hopefully be able to pick up a couple extra ones. But if I'm able to pick up a couple extra ones, Lollipop, you earned yourself a Techno Fantasy Atlas. For just being such an awesome cat all these years. Thank you, Lollipop. Appreciate it. So in this case, the RPG fund is Lollipop's RPG fund. Let me see here. Let's see here. Derek says, I really love using Fog of Wars in a situation like this, encouraging players to find vantage points to expose more of the map. And absolutely, I love playing with some of the preconceptions of this. So, for example, I will, if the players find an ancient map, right? Maybe the players are exploring Weatherstone, and they find an ancient map or an old treasure map, And what I do is I come over here and I show them this. It's a map of the Bloudwater. And they can see that there's a castle or some sort of keep or fortress and a nearby town or village at the exit of the Bloudwater. Now, they're all the way over here. But suddenly there's this kind of this interest, this compelling. How do we get there? I don't know what these, what these towers, or I don't know what these, this thing is, right? But I want to go there because this is something that the Forbidden Lands map does really well, which is Gonza asked, question, Derek, are you playing to find out as the GM with this map, or have you predefined the sites and locations? Gonza, I am playing to find out. So this is what I call a quasi-quantum map. And Forbidden Lands kind of encourages this. So, kudos to Forbidden Lands. I do have some problems with some of the Forbidden Lands mechanics. I've talked about willpower being one of them. But the idea of the wilderness exploration in Forbidden Lands is, I think, top-notch, which is this. These are the locations of the adventure sites. But you'll notice they don't have a label. This is a quantum town. The location of the quantum town is known. It's predefined. It is in stone before the game begins. But what this town is and what's there, that is left to be determined and may not be determined until the players discover it or until they are doing some research or something that would necessitate it to be discovered. And then I might roll on a random table or oracle, or I might have an idea, or if I need to bring a town into the game, I will do so. But rather than just putting it anywhere on the map that I want, the fact is that these locations have sort of already been hard-coded. And I'll be honest with you, because I knew that my players have this map because they all own the Forbidden Lands box set, I went in and took my map and I did some photoshopping for a few hours, and I actually moved a bunch of the locations around on the map. So if you have the Forbidden Lands map, I have put things, new things, removed old things, swapped some other things to put them into different places. And I'll be honest with you, now I did this before the campaign began. I wanted to lock those locations in. And I'll be completely honest with you, this might be one of them. Because I, in my case, when I was looking at the map, I was like, I'd look at their map and I go, why isn't there a town there or a castle there? It feels like there really should be. And I'd be like, I'm going to put one there, because I want my players to feel that same, like, I want the players to feel smart. I want the players to look at, this map of this river when it looks like, this, and I want them to go, oh, man, I bet you there's some sort of like castle or village or something, right? There's got to be something around this lake. There can't just be nothing. And so then when they, eventually come in here and explore it, and then they see it, it feels very, right? It feels very rewarding to them. And I think that's really cool. But they know that those locations are out there. See, if these locations, and I could lie to my players, of course, but I don't like to lie to my players. I like to let my players know what's up. If these locations weren't here, if this map was well and truly blank, then what are we exploring? The GM can just put a town wherever he wants to. I feel like that also makes exploration feel pointless. Because basically you're saying, we're just going to go until the GM says, okay, that's enough. You spent enough time wandering. I'm going to put a dungeon here. I'm going to put a castle here. I'm going to put a keep here. I don't want that either. I want the players to feel like these places out there are real. They're there to be found by them. They're there to give them experience and give them treasure. But what they are specifically, that we don't know yet. We won't know that until we engage. Let's see here. Tim says, we always feel the need to set up a baller home base before we take multi-week journeys. That's also true. I mean, that's also part of the fun. I mean, I know I'm a weirdo, but like when I used to play MMOs all the time, particularly EverQuest, but you know, World of Warcraft 2, you know, part of my favorite part was like, you know, sitting in Stormwind or sitting in Iron, you know, Forge or whatever, or sitting in Kinos or Freeport, you know, getting ready, building up, you know, getting your supplies ready, making sure, you know, your bags were empty. Did we want to bring some of this? You know, does everybody have enough, you know, bone chips for the necromancer to cast, you know, whatever? Does everybody have what they need? Does everyone have food, drink? Okay, cool. You know, I like that sort of setup phase, you know, which is pretty cool. You're back. You had to refill some job applications. Well, welcome back. For analog players, I made a scale-accurate treasure map for my players. It looks like a WoW zone map, but with no towns or dungeons marked. That's pretty cool. I mean, that's fun. That's very fun. Every time I hear Derek talk about F20, I hate it more. I mean, that's not my intention here. Let's see here. Draw monsters in undiscovered area for in-universe maps. Draw monster. I'm not quite sure it's this. So I'm sorry if you said this earlier, but I just got here. How does this jive with Dungeon World leave blanks? Well, Travis, hopefully I just explained that. In this case, the leave blanks part is I don't necessarily know. And I should actually say that there is a degree of quantumness to this. There's one other quantumness to this, which is these towns and locations are on the map, but I don't know what they are. I mean, you know, again, you know, spoiler here for my players, so don't pay attention if you're watching. But like, you know, there is a town here on the coast, but I don't know what that town is. I don't know what that town is like. I don't know if those town folk are really nice. I don't know if those townsfolk are evil. I don't know if those townsfolk are, you know, cursed. I don't know if those towns, I know nothing about that town, but I do know that it's there. And that also gives me direction and purpose because the players can say, well, we're going to ask around in Freygrove, you know, and this would literally happen if we were playing. And remember, I have this up on a monitor at our game table, this map. And, you know, the players might stop in Freygrove and they might ask the Freygrovians, you know, what do you know about any cities or towns, you know, further along down the coast? And the people from, you know, Freygrove might say, you know, well, you know, I haven't really left that much, but the merchants say that there's some sort of town on the northern, you know, part of the bay. And it's like, okay, so they have a general, you know, and I'll probably even come in here and just do this, you know, you know, and just be like, it's somewhere in this region. And so the players know that, okay, you know, we're going to look for that. And so they know what they're looking for. They know the general purpose of reason, and they're going to do that. So this becomes a little bit more of a journey. But that's because it started off as exploration, and now they're honing it down by using skills or role playing with, you know, engaging with the fiction and talking to people and finding out information so that they can make better informed choices. That module in Foundry is amazing. Technically, it's 2 modules, but the main one that you are seeing here is called World Explorer. That is the name of that module. Kyle, Derek, question about the shirts. Were they in the garage? Got asked in the Discord. They were not. Well, maybe. Hey, we had a super chat come in. I think I don't know if they're ruined. We did have a couple extra Origins shirts. Those were the orange shirts that we gave out at Origins. They were our Origins exclusive Origins 2024 shirts. I did have a couple extra of those because I brought more than I needed just in case somebody else showed up. And I was going to give some of those away, but those were in the garage. So I don't know if those are ruined or not. The black KOLC shirts were inside the house because I keep them inside the house. I like that Bob told you to come onto the stream while I'm streaming to ask me a question about the shirts. In Rapana Thuk, did you go down the well? Well, mind blown, no. Because in the Super Extreme example, or the Super Extreme edition, they introduce a new area called Zelkor's Ferry, which is made for first level characters, and they don't actually go to the graveyard. They don't actually go to the inverted cross. Alternate GM. We'll catch the stream later. Excited to see Forbidden Lands. Uh, Knights are protesting for tea. Send to New Zealand. Yeah, I mean, it's expensive shipping, but at some point I got to get rid of them somehow, and if that means I have to ship overland, I mean, we talked about doing it for some of the stickers or something like that, but just filling out those customs forms just to send a shirt is just crazy, But thank you, alternate GM. I don't know. I mean, if somebody really, really wants a t-shirt and they're willing to pay the whatever it is, crazy amount, $15, $20 shipping just to get the shirt shipped to you. I mean, maybe we could figure something out. And again, it is, pretty. Are they smoky? Were they in your garage? Again, the Origins exclusive ones, the what are we even doing here shirts that we had for Origins 2024, those were in the garage, and I only had a couple left because that was a special order. I think I only got 15 made, and it was just for people at the con. But I did have like a couple left over after the con. But the black shirts were inside, and in fact, about half of my KLC shirts are actually in sealed plastic bags with the size label stuck on them. When I thought I was going to be shipping out, dozens of them, I kind of bagged them up ready to go so I can just stick a shipping label on it and send it out its way. Player Core 2 was $60. The shipping was $45. Jesus. Any chance a shirt order today could find its way to Gen Con? Asking for a friend. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you're watching and you're a patron and you have tickets or something like that, and you want to get a shirt, I can definitely bring shirts to Gen Con for sure. I've done that before. BitShift. Hell yeah. Oh, what a super chat. Thank you, BitShift. Third super chat coming in hot, crushing the food and fun fund. BitShift, thank you. That is very, very, very generous of you. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for that. That is amazing. I will. That is going to be really great. I mean, again, this is going to be a very unique Gen Con for me because, in fact, you might even say I'm being a little bit more exploratory. I'm going in there. I'm not like I'm here to do X, Y, and Z. Right. I'm there to explore the space. I'm there to kind of cruise the hall. And you know what, BitShift, so I mentioned it was like a secret tech. It's not secret tech, but again, I overdo myself because I don't know, it's in my nature, but because of BitShift had that super chat. So I cannot promise that this will happen because there's 1.5 million reasons why this could go really bad and it may not work. But I have these I saw that this was something that they sold, and this is literally what started the idea. Okay, so I've had these for a while. These are these Rode Wireless Go microphones. They're remote lavs. Well, they clip here. You might have seen a lot of people have them clipped up here with this thing, but I actually have lavalier mics for them so that you can run a little lav, and then this connects to your camera or your phone, and it does the audio. If you've seen some of my Las Vegas streams, you've seen me use these before in Las Vegas. That way I'm using a real microphone instead of, just the phone's microphone in a crowded place. So you've got these, this is the transceiver, and they actually come with these, these little wind socks here. Hold on a second. I'm going to switch over to here. So they come with these little dead cats that you can put on so that, that. All right. I saw this, that Rode makes this, and so I bought it. So they sell this, okay? Now, this seems pretty stupid, and the fact that anyone would pay for this is pretty crazy and ridiculous. But it's got this slot here in the back, and this Rode thing clips in here. And then it comes with this thing, and now you have a microphone. Now, inside of here is just the lavalier thing, but this gave me the idea of going to Gen Con, and since I'm just there for a couple of days, I'm not really going to be doing a lot of events. I had the idea of going into the con hall and going around to different booths and maybe finding small press publishers, the actual designer, not like the big corporate booth where it's just a bunch of volunteers or employees who don't know actually anything. I'm talking about people who are really actually connected to the game, like Emmanuel, right, who is going to be at Need Games. And I'm going to have my camera and my audio equipment, and I was thinking of doing a series of interviews at Gen Con, recording it and then cutting it into a video or a series of videos, and just sort of have basically like Derek interviews at people at Gen Con, and just use this microphone and be like, ask them questions about they could plug their game or whatever like that, but also throw them the kind of curveball questions that I would be known for throwing at them, and really question their game design, and like put them on the spot and make them have to show up. So I'm gonna try to maybe do something like that at Gen Con. And to be honest with you, if I'm being completely honest with you, BitShift, it's because I am worried I'm gonna be bored. Normally when I go to Gen Con, I'm going there with bags full of games, and I'm like there to run a bunch of RPGs or whatever. This year I'm not bringing anything really, and so it's just myself, and I'm just like, what am I gonna do? Just like wander and I'm not signed up for any events. I wouldn't even have tried because I didn't think I was going, so now that I'm going at this last minute, and I figured, well, what am I gonna do? I've been to Gen Con many times, so I've been around. What up, Sunhawk?
Sunhawk tipped $25.
Well, thank you, Sunhawk. Appreciate that. The RPG Fund definitely uses the help. Thank you, Sunhawk. Appreciate it. Thanks. I'm glad you've been able to come to a bunch of these streams, Sunhawk. It's been cool having you on and having you around. Hopefully, you're getting good value out of your time with the Knights. Thank you very much for that. That is very generous of you. Chadram says, yes, that's an amazing idea. Ask the tough KOLC questions. Make sure you record the bit when Paizo escort you out of their booth. So that is I was actually wondering, I was like, should I go to Paizo? I mean, I kind of want to, as part of the thing, I do kind of want to focus on what I was calling smaller press people, because this is part of this idea also came from Smith, and I were talking the other day. And I actually don't talk to Smith that much anymore. He's that busy. I don't really chat with him as much as I used to and everything like that. But we had a nice little conversation the other day. And we were talking about, this idea of designing we're talking about the new 5th edition release and all this other stuff. And we were talking about designing a game for yourself and hoping that you find an audience, or designing a game that respects the audience's preferences and choices. And, there's kind of value to sort of both. I think that there's something to be said about artistic integrity, and I'm just going to fuck the world. I'm going to make whatever game I want to make. That's kind of the Luke Crane approach. You got to respect it, right? But we started talking about, as we usually do, we started talking about like Legend of the Five Rings and Braveheart and stuff like that. And, we were talking, I told Smith, he goes, I know exactly what line you're thinking of. And there's this great line from Braveheart where Robert the Bruce, who's kind of supposed to be the bad guy in some sense, he's talking to his father about how much he really respects William Wallace. And his father says, William Wallace is easy to respect. Uncompromising men are easy to respect. He has courage. So does a dog. But it's the ability to compromise that makes a man noble. And so there's this idea that it is something, it's nice to be like, this is my uncompromised vision. Fuck the world. But it's also maybe being very selfish. And it's the ability to compromise, and it's the ability to make concessions that allows you to reach a larger audience. And that might be good for your bottom line, but also there's something to be said. If you're making a game, right, you want people to play it. Anyways, my point was, we were talking about these passion projects, and I said, exactly. Think about how many, I've been going to Gen Con for over 20 years. Think about how many times there's somebody with a booth. They paid thousands of dollars to get a booth at Gen Con. This is their baby. This is their heart and soul. This is the RPG that for them is their, be all end all. They think that this is it. And I just walk right past it. I look in and I walk past. There's nothing that grabs me. And this is something that somebody poured their heart and soul into. So I thought maybe with this Gen Con, since I'm going to have extra time, I can bring the mic, I can bring a camera, we can do some interviews at the booth if people are interested, and ask them, a couple minutes of questions and then put together and, give them some exposure, but also sort of try to, just define their passion, and not just to ask a question about their RPG, but like, sort of those Jared Sorensen questions. Like, what are you trying to do with this RPG? Like, why did you make it? And what are the mechanics? Like, what is it that you're trying to do? What is the story of your game that you're trying to do? Someone should totally volunteer as a videographer for this. Well, that would be assuming that I don't have the copious amounts of equipment that would allow me to do this very easily. That being said, if I had a videographer, that would be amazing. Cheers.
GM Scott tipped $35. Go support some new heartbreakers. See you down there.
Yeah, Jim Scott, buddy. I feel like I see you more than I see members of my family these days. I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully we can grab some dinner and hang out. Again, I'm going incognito. I'm going, unofficially, but I'm going to be around, and I love hanging out and seeing all you folks, and it's good stuff. But thank you. I will definitely support some heartbreakers. I don't know. Now when I look at RPGs, I'm just looking for something out of the ordinary, just crazy. There's been some games that I picked up that I would never have picked up a while ago, but sometimes you find unexpected gems. If anything, this channel has kind of ruined that fun for me, because I'm keeping my ear closer to the pavement in terms of new RPGs and what's coming out, and everything gets hyped up. It used to be I would go to Gen Con and literally see an RPG at Indie Press or God, what's the other one? I can't even think of the other one. The other one that always has all the independent games. Wow, my brain is completely farting. Anyways, like Indie Press Revolution or the other one, or just some random game, and I go, wow, I've never heard of this before. What is this? I'm excited. I'm going to read that. And like, I remember like there's so many RPGs that now are like part of my lexicon that's what happened for that. Like Dread was like that. Fiasco was like that. And that was always really, really fun. So, Scott, you said you're going to be in tomorrow evening. So I'm planning on leaving here around noon. So I'll probably be getting into Indianapolis area around 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., depending if I stop for food or something. Derek says I need to stop by MythWorks. Wild Sea's pretty great. Wild Sea is a great example of a book that on the surface I would never have picked up. Chainsaw ships, like, come on, just give me a boat. But it's such a fantastic read, and it's such a well-designed book, and it's a real treat. And I own Cyberpunk, or as I always call it, Cyberpunk, but Cyberpunk isn't my favorite thing. I just picked it up because I thought it was really creative and innovative. And of course, everyone keeps talking about Slug Blaster, so there you have to pick it up here. Yes, just give me a boat. But the game won me over with its charm and all that other stuff. Have you ever looked into DRPG or Die RPG? I actually don't know if that's how it's. Is it supposed to be like DRPG, like the German D, or is it Die RPG? Either way, I have not. The Spider Cook must live. You should be in town by 7 or 8. Awesome. I've always wanted to do Cyberpunk. I know, Tim. I know you have. It's just, I don't know. It's just not my favorite genre. I couldn't even tell you why it's my favorite genre, but, die as in death. Oh, okay. It's based on a combat. It's kind of a meta game. I don't really know that much about it. So I can't really say. So the answer is no, I have not checked it out. Let's see. Sunhawk, you says, going back to from the tips, says, you're welcome. I normally have Tuesdays off, but the last 2 months have been weird, so I'm glad I could back to a regular schedule and come to participate. Well, that is awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate hanging out, and I appreciate that tip. It's basically goth Jumanji. Well, that's an interesting way to spin it. So I know we kind of got distracted there, and that's okay because that's what we do here. But one of the things that I think has worked for me with Forbidden Lands has been this interaction and this interactivity that allows the players to interact with the map without it being just a completely known entity. And that's been really, really beneficial. Additionally, I think that it is critical, whether you're in a town, whether you're on the ocean, whether you're in whatever, is you have to make sure that, and this is Perilous Wilds, if you don't own it, go buy it. You know, and I mean, you know, Jason, is it Jason? Is it Jason? Yes, Jason Lutz. Okay. I didn't want to make, I thought it was Jason. Jason Lutz says it best right here. He says, as noted in the glossary, central to travel and exploration in a world of fantasy adventure are the things that make the world both fantastical and full of adventure. These encounters are broken into two categories, discoveries and dangers, and may come into play as a result of various moves or when introduced at the GM's discretion. And, you know, I think that that's what it comes down to, is when you're in the city and you're in the wilderness, you have to resist this temptation to just just to use a bunch of random encounters that are just endless grindy fights, or, you know, endless, you know, boring, you know, oh, make a skill check. Okay. You made the skill check. You're good. Oh, you failed the skill check. Everybody takes a pointless, you know, amount of damage or something like that, that you're just going to heal up anyways. You know, modern games really, really struggle in this respect because, you know, we've talked about this before, but you know, when you can get full HP on a long rest, it introduces a really weird tension into the game, because, you know, especially when you're traveling overworld, right? The context of the game might be like, you know, several days journey. You know, the party leaves Halvard's Ferry here and they travel for several, you know, a day here, and then they travel for a day here. And then, okay, now we're getting into unexplored territory. They travel for a day here, they travel for a day here, and they're making their way down. Okay, great. But if when they sleep, they get all their hit points back and they get all their, you know, everything's healed, then the dangers of that day's activities are basically come down to, did you die or not? And that's also one of these historical legacy problems that especially D&D, and by that I mean Pathfinder as well, have struggled with. Because again, when these games and these rules were made, hit points recovered 1 HP per day. Not per level per day, 1 HP per day. So if on the way to the dungeon, you took 20 damage out of your 35 hit points, you know, you were starting the adventure off at 15. Now, that necessarily wasn't suicide, because again, very rarely did the, you know, monsters do, you know, 3d8 damage or something like that. A lot of things nickeled and dimed you, d8 here, d6 here. But it was a bigger issue. It was a bigger deal to be down those hit points. Now, 5th edition, Pathfinder 2, whatever, what have you, you know, you take that long rest, everybody's at full. And I think that gets back to this idea of, you know, resources. A lot of reasons why these games are fun is because resources, when you're in the dungeon, when you're in a combat, resources are limited and they get depleted. And part of the fun of engaging with the mechanics is basically managing your budget, right? Like managing your bank account of these resources. Well, when you're in like a city, for example, it's pretty hard to run out of resources, right? Because you're in a city. So what resource can the players use? When you talk about overland exploration, well, in the modern game, you know, torches are super cheap and weigh nothing. Food is super cheap and it weighs nothing, right? You have cantrips that can create as much clean, potable water as you want. So, and hit points come back at 100% every time you go to sleep. So what resource is there that, you know, these dangers are interacting with? What is it that makes these things? And by the way, when you go, so the consequence of any of these events is basically meaningless, because it doesn't really affect any of our resources, then that means that people will go, oh, so this is just busy work. This has no real impact on the game. And it's really, 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 it feels boring and it feels like a grind. Because you're going to go, well, I know this stuff isn't going to kill me. It's kind of just wasting my time. And that isn't great. That feels pretty bad. Now, Shadram brings up a story, which he had shared with us and the Discord. In my Forbidden Lands game, a player lost their leg in a skeleton fight in the wilderness. Last night, they had to get him to a town, 5 days travel away. It was grueling. They arrived cold, tired, and half broken. And this is where Forbidden Lands has a little bit of an advantage, because in Forbidden Lands, if your character becomes broken, which is to say you go to 0 hit points, and by the way, you don't have hit points, you have your strength score, and your strength score might be 3, 4, or like 5. So you basically have 3, 4, or 5 hit points. So if you take 3 or 4 points of damage, you go down to 0. You are broken. Now, the game is pretty generous. If your character takes rest, you restore all of your, which is just 6 hours, you restore all of those things to full. So doesn't that have the same problem as D&D and Pathfinder 2? Well, no. Because, number one, it's only 3 or 4 hit points. So your character is usually 1 to 2, maybe 3 hits from being broken. But when you break, you roll on a critical injury table. And the critical injury table creates long-lasting, multi-day, multi-week injuries, which impact your character. In some cases, permanently, in the case of a lost leg. So that means that the events of a dangerous encounter can long outlast just that 1 day's worth of travel, you know? So, I think that for some players, now again, victory comes in many different, senses, or many different ways. For some people, getting your ass kicked, like what Shadram was describing here, but then pulling together, using your resources, making some good rolls, pushing through the night, not stopping to rest. Everybody gains the sleepy condition. You keep going. The wits fall down. You avoid another random encounter. You run away from another one, and then you make it back to town, as he said. Cold, tired, and half broken. You barely got back to parity, but it can feel like a win, It's like when you're in Vegas, and, you have a shitty first day, and you're in the hole, $500. And then the next day you battle back and you have a great day. You win $400, $500. Technically you're just back to even, but it feels like a victory, right? Because you're like, I was at the bottom of the well, but now I have crawled my way back up through my skill and my grit and my determination. And that could feel like a win. Now, you don't want every session to be like that. You don't want every time they go out into the wilderness to be like that. If that happens all the time, then maybe the game is a little too dangerous, and maybe they should have changed that, because some people might find that fun. So I'm not going to say that can't be anybody's personal fun, but at a certain point that starts to get grueling. But if a loss like that can turn into this fun agency-filled moment, I think that's a lot more fun. Whereas, contrast that, what he's describing here, to a standard D20 game. Oh, there was a crazy fight versus skeletons. Our fighter got reduced to dying 2. It was really scary. And then after the fight, we wounded him, and he was back to full hit points and had no conditions. And, we continued on our way. See, that it didn't change the game. The party just kept going. Right? In Shadram's case, they had to abandon whatever plans that they had, because now they had a guy with missing a leg and they had to get him back to town. Now, clearly, you can understand when you think about a game like D&D or Pathfinder, which is designed to just get you through the adventure so that you can keep making progress and hitting milestones, why they might want a game that basically says it doesn't really matter what happens in this fight, because afterwards you're going to be back to full, your character's going to have no lasting negative consequences, and that's a good thing because it allows you to just keep going through the milestones and keep going through the chapters and keep, the grind going. When you have something terrible and horrible, like what Shadram is describing happen, it can derail the shit out of your entire session, or it sounds like 2 sessions. For some people, this would be very, very frustrating and annoying, because They weren't out exploring. They were trying to journey. They were trying to get somewhere to do the thing that will progress the adventure. So in that case, all of this stuff can end up just feeling like a pain in the ass. And that's why like the context of these games is very important, and understanding the difference between journeying and exploring, but also understanding where does the experience come from? Where does the reward cycle come from? If the group is just like, we just want to get through this adventure path and we just want to level up, and the only way we can do that is by hitting these milestones along the way of the adventure path, then this kind of activity is going to feel very frustrating to people. Beowulf says, you know how in some video games eating heals you? Yes. Was thinking that could be fun mechanic to include in RPG, but it has to be a proper meal and it only works once every 4 hours or ever. So there's an interesting idea there, but I think you're kind of I don't, as you wrote it there, I don't understand why that is a fun mechanic. It's basically what I would say. There's something there that you're hinting at that I think is really cool, but it's not specifically about, eating per se, like a cooked meal or something like that, a proper meal. Rations would become potions. And that's exactly the point. You've just kind of replaced rations with potions. To a certain extent, now, of course, as we have said many times, Beowulf, when I hiked and I was out, journeying, right? Because to be clear, I wasn't exploring when I was on the Appalachian Trail. I was following a trail, trying to get where I was going. Carrying enough food was a real challenge, part of the reason why it doesn't feel like rations count for a lot is because people are carrying multiple weeks worth of food on them, and that's before you have a bag of holding or before you have a Heward's handy haversack or a portable hole. It's a trivial encounter, it's a trivial amount. So it just doesn't matter. That's the main problem. Food is heavy, food is bulky, food goes bad. Even rations, should have certain limitations. But when you introduce those, the game turns out the game becomes more frustrating, and the game can become harder if what the players are trying to do is just get to the adventure to go do the adventure thing. Then it can feel like, this stuff is just getting in the way of what we want to do. Dr. Metropolis says, the Dark Sun book addressed the resource thing. The create food and water ritual is not allowed. Planar travel teleport spells are not allowed. Selling survival days to people in the waste, etc. And, I said we would kind of loop back to this. This is an example of a game, Dark Sun, specifically he's talking about 4th edition Dark Sun, that knows what it's about. If that game is about survival in a desolate desert world, then allowing things that trivialize those actions is not beneficial. So that makes us think back to our PF2 games and our D&D 5e games, where we have spells, magic items, and just even core rules or class features that trivialize all of these type of exploration and all of these types of journeys. It just completely trivializes them. And the reason they're doing that is because they want you to be able to skip them. In their mind, that is the boring part of the game. That is the part of the game that is in between the exciting part of the game, the good part of the game. And so that's why those mechanics are in there, is to let you skip that stuff. It's the fast travel version of the game. So Dark Sun in 4th edition said, we're going to remove that stuff because that's the point of the game. And this is where I kind of said I had a little bit of umbrage with Forbidden Lands, which is, as written, the game is, survival in a cursed world or something. But because of the resource dice, your character can carry D12 food and D12 water. Well, the way that the resource dice decay, D12 food or D12 water is it's like almost 3 weeks of food and water, which is such an unbelievable amount of food, and it's an unthinkable amount of water to carry as a person. And to the point where if you play the game at rules as written, it may feel like your character is in danger of running out of food and water, but the truth of the matter is you basically never will, as I was pointing out, like, to somebody, those office cooler, water jugs, the big plastic ones that, that are like, I don't know, a couple feet tall, they've got the handle and you turn them upside down into the little office water coolers. Those are usually 5 gallons. A human should be drinking 1 gallon of water a day. A human who is marching overland with gear and armor and swords and weapons and going through difficult terrain and, is probably going to need 2 gallons of water a day. So that person, in order to maintain their health for a week, 7 days, would need 14 gallons of water. That is 3 full of those gigantic office water jugs that your character has to carry on them. And that's just for 1 week. And as everybody knows, a pint's a pound the world around. A gallon of water is 8 pounds. 15 gallons of water is 120 pounds of water. It's a insane amount of weight. It's unthinkable. It's just unthinkable. And so any game that allows you to carry, in my personal opinion, more than a day's worth of water is, I think, crazy. I mean, the exception being, like, if you're, and it's like, well, there's a reason why getting through the deserts was difficult, because it's impractical to carry that much water. Now, of course, if you have a ship, if you have a mount, if you have a wagon or a cart, those things start to change. But that also can muck up, that introduces a whole host of new problems as well. Yeah, I don't think they've ever been so relieved to hear a gate guard call halt who goes there. I mean, that's a great moment, right? When that's a real victory that I think very few people in RPGs get to experience anymore. And so I'm proud of your group. I'm proud that I'm happy that you guys had that experience. Eric, I like the way it's done in Torchbearer. You need to make narrative choices to earn meta currency in order to rest and recover. Now, I love Torchbearer, and I think earning checks so that you can do stuff at camp phase is awesome, and it creates an amazing experience. It's complete bullshit from a simulationist perspective, verisimilitude. I want my game to feel like it's the real life. You're absolutely right. It's complete bullshit meta currency, but I will say this: it works. It works really well. I mean, that's definitely all I have to say about it, but you are 100% right. It is a narrative. It literally makes the act of camping, it makes the act of sitting down to sort of, earn your respite, something that you actually had to earn through play. Now, some people obviously take complete and total umbrage with that, but we've always enjoyed it. We think it's really awesome because of the play pattern that it creates, Yeah, I mean, that's a great scene. Obviously, it's more of a chase scene than an overland journey scene, but yeah. Eating in my game restores stamina, which was an action resource. All right, that's fair. A bag of Cure Light wound scrolls. Yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot of reasons why that stuff can get off. Again, the reason that we have our characters with magic items and magic spells is because we want to make things that are inconvenient not an issue, right? A non-entity, just not a problem. And so the game itself and players themselves are incentivized to make all of these choices and decisions, worthless. So my, it's kind of a tangent here, but I like the idea of meals mattering. This is something that I actually wanted to do for Forbidden Lands, but I didn't do it. And the reason why, so this is kind of a tangent within a tangent within a tangent, but I think that it makes it a very interesting gameplay pattern. When I first started off hiking on the Appalachian Trail, I wanted to keep my weight really low. And so I did not bring a stove. I did not bring a source. I didn't bring a can of heat, a stove. I didn't bring a can of cook fuel. I didn't bring a camp stove. And I didn't bring anything that needed cooking. So everything I ate was basically, preserved meat, jerky, or like a summer sausage, something that could last a couple of days out in the wilderness. When I first started, I felt fine. I was doing fine physically. I had enough calories for sure, but I was missing something. Like my body was being nourished, but like my soul wasn't. And I've always heard, I never really understood it until this happened. The power of not just food, but like of a meal, of like a hot meal, a cooked meal, something that is a real dish. And you're mentioning this here when you're cold and you're wet. And I specifically remember that I went after I got through Maine and through New Hampshire, and when I got into Vermont, I said, okay, enough with this. And I picked up, a canister of fuel and a little stove. Oh God, what is it called? It's like the most ubiquitous stove down the trail. And I had my little cook pot. And I started buying in the grocery stores, and I started having my girlfriend at the time send me in the mail, rice, potato sides, the kind of where you add it to boiling water and it, fluffs up and gets. And I remember after a Vermont on the trail is called Vermud because it rains a lot in the Green Mountains, and the trails are really they're not poorly maintained, but they get wet and they get muddy, and it was just a gruel. And the year that I hiked was so wet. That was the year that like the hurricane hit Virginia. Shenandoah got shut down for a while, and there was a lot of rain that year. So I was soaked to the bone, and it was like it might have been like the second day after I had my stove, and I remember getting to camp, and I stripped out of my hiking clothes, and I just put on the only other pair of clothes I had, which was just a dry shirt and a dry pair of shorts that I kept in my dry sack. I got changed into some dry clothes, and they weren't clean because, right? I mean, I'm not washing them. They're dry clothes, and I cooked this hot meal. I mean, and here's the thing. I've eaten at Michelin star restaurants. When I go to Vegas, we routinely go and, some of the finest steakhouses there. I've had some nice meals, in my time. I remember thinking like, this was it was like, Knorr, is that the brand? Knorr. It was like a package of Knorr rice sides poured into like a cup of boiling water, reconstituted, reheated, and then I think I had like one of those like Star-Kissed tuna, spicy tuna packs, vacuum seal packed, mix that in, sort of make basically really ghetto tuna helper. And I remember eating this and being like, this is the most incredible thing I've ever eaten in my entire life. I will never eat anything that feels as good as this moment. And it really drove home for me the power of a hot cooked meal for people in those type of situations. And I just think about the typical D&D character. Food is such an afterthought, and we have these rations, which if you think about it are like a survival measure. This dry, it's probably dry tack, and there may not, no one even really thinks about what's in a ration. It's horrible. And it should just, drive you crazy, or it should, cause all sorts of mental anguish, but it doesn't, because we just, subtract the ration and go to the next day. That's what it means, So anyways, I certainly appreciate the value of a meal. Now, is that something that we want to focus on in our adventuring, power leveling adventure, let's go fight gods game? Probably not, but There's something there. Let's just say that. The rise of cooking mechanics in RPG video games drive me crazy. I hated it in Zelda and every game that copied it. Yeah, I mean, there's been this sort of move in a lot of adventure games to move away from the adventure aspect and get more into like the mundane aspect of it. We joke a lot about like fishing mini games, and I always go, what the fuck is with these fishing mini games? And everybody in the Patreon will be like, I love fishing mini games. When I played this game, I didn't even play it. I just did the fishing mini game. And I'm always like, why? I don't get it. So like, I get where there's this tension between wanting it to be an adventuring game, but also being going to be like, I want to have quaint rules for making a good meal. Like there's a tension there. There's a balance. You can't have it all. Now there's a natural thing. I want to have everything. And then, I want to have a game that's super adventuring, but also has 30 pages of rules for cooking meals. That's where you get to that, interesting, but not fun, right? That's where the squeeze, the juice to squeeze ratio starts to really fall off, and you're adding a ton of complication for almost no benefit. And I don't know if it's particularly interesting, Rivo says, hell yeah, give me more Dark Sun. The D6, D8 food rule is a great one. It is a great one. And Beowulf, honestly, if the game used D4s, a D4 water would actually be more appropriate. But D6 is fine. Kyle says, I went through 3 gallons a day when I was deployed in the desert. Yeah, that's just insane. I mean, that's 24 pounds of water a day. And, I think that someone deployed in adverse conditions in an active combat zone, that's probably fairly analogous to what an adventurer goes through. I mean, you're traveling through forbidden lands. You're traveling through dangerous areas. Things are trying to kill you. You're fighting for your life, sometimes multiple times per day. I mean, you're in the shit. So Dark Sun overview look on the stream went. Well, the next one we were doing is Eberron. So we did our Birthright stream a couple weeks ago. We did well with that, did well. We're going to do Eberron next. But Dark Sun is definitely on the short list of things that we could do. Let's see here. Arkillan says those ultralight cold soakers on the AT. Yeah, I didn't even bother to cold soak. I just basically just ate, jerky, very hearty cheeses because I would eat them pretty quick. I had like a bunch of like pepperoni sticks that I would buy, or like summer sausages. What else did I have? Tortillas. Things that packed well, carried well, until I started bringing stuff that I could, eat and heat. And then sometimes I would treat myself, a little bit. Like when I would go into like a trail town, I'd stop in some, local kind of hiker-friendly grocery store. And I might sometimes pick me up a couple Mountain House meals, because those are pretty fucking good. I mean, they're really expensive, and I'm sure that they wouldn't be as good if you weren't hiking. But at the time, they felt like a real banquet. Bitshift, did you hike the trail? I did hike the trail, Bitshift. There were some complications along the way, but I hiked the trail. I'll just say that. Let's see. 120 pounds of water. I was just overhead pressing 126 pounds. Damn. Almost at 135. We've talked about this. I will never get to 135 again. I never got there. Well, I may have gotten there once, but with my shoulder surgery that I had when I was 30, I don't think I'll ever be able to bend overhead press 135, but that's pretty sweet. 126 is a lot. But yeah, that's not a weight you'd want to carry. By the way, that's just of the water. Like, that's not even including your armor and your sword and your other stuff. It's just crazy. So Skosglen says, I was thinking about wilderness exploration for my next PF2 game. Since starvation is possible, I am instead looking at hunting, gathering for fresh meals as a morale boost for the next encounter. I mean, sometimes, Skosglen, I don't think your idea here is a bad one. I think that, we have sticks and we have carrots. And I think giving players an incentive to engage with the mechanics is a great way of also doing it, because it's a great way of saying this is opt-in. You know, I've talked on this channel about our Dragon Tide game, and the Dragon Tide game is built around Dragonbane, and some people want to go in and play Dragonbane, and that's fine. I'm creating additional mechanics that are more complicated and maybe a little bit more involved and might feel a little gamey to some folks. That's fine. You don't have to do them. It's opt-in. You don't have to engage with those mechanics if you don't want to. In fact, I would dare say that you might be wasting your time doing it. It's only if you find it interesting. The thing that you're describing is, look, if you guys don't want to do any of this hunting, gathering bullshit, and I'm not making you do it, but it is an option that's available to you that you can take advantage of that, you know, if you choose to, could give you a benefit or a bonus. So that's taking more of the carrot approach. And I think that is I think that's good advice. I think that's good advice. Yeah, rations, hardtack, you know, and maybe, you know, some dried meat or some dried fruit. And that's if you're lucky, right? Most of the time it's ship's biscuits, right? It's a quiet retreat. I can't skyfish in real life, so it's cool to do it in a JRPG. And I think that's what you're seeing with a lot of these adventure games. So this is something, I've said this before on this channel, and this is something that this is one of those, you know, I've learned myself a lot about the human condition. You know, I have a friend who lives with me, and she is disabled, and she loves, you know, The Sims and Stardew Valley, those type of games. And I find those games to be very boring. And, you know, I've seen this with the TTRPGs, right? Where I'm always like, adventure, hard cut, you know, hard frame, you know, skip that shit, get to the exciting stuff, make it exciting, you know, make it dangerous, make it difficult, make it life or death choices. Do you save the town? Do you save your brother? Right? And a lot of people are like, no, like, I love the quieter moments, and I love hanging out. I love the slice of life. I love just fishing and bonding and role playing in character as these characters. And I realize that the reason that these differences exist is because, and I'm not saying this is universal, but generically speaking, I've had a pretty easy life. Sure. My house almost burned down the other day. My garage is toast. My battery went today, and I got scammed on Amazon. But all in all, you know, things have been pretty easy for me my whole life. My health has been good. I've always been gainfully employed most of the time. You know, I've never been in danger of you know, losing my house or being a thing. So for me, at a certain extent, my life has been kind of boring, kind of ordinary. So what do I crave? I crave adventure. I crave excitement. I crave danger. I crave difficult choices. I crave having to choose between my loved ones or my beliefs, right? For me, that's all fun and make-believe. But there are other people who life or death struggles, that's their real life. That's their day-to-day, right? And so the fantasy is just a quiet evening spent enjoying your hobbies in a risk-free and stress-free environment. That's the fantasy. That's the world that they want to live in, because the real world, you know, that's where the danger, the stress, the you know, excitement, which is not always a good thing, right? You know, so when I can, you know, compare me and I compare my my housemate, my roommate, who, you know, used to be my ex-girlfriend, or used to be my girlfriend, now is my ex-girlfriend. You know, the games that we like and the games that she likes are very different. But she's coming to this from a very different perspective. She's coming to this from a history of cancer and transplants and, you know, just like, you know, a lot of, you know, homelessness and stuff like that. So for her, it's what she wants out of a game is very different than what I want out of a game. She doesn't want that kind of stress. She wants that kind of more slice of life experience, because she never got to experience that slice of life in her real life. So she does it, you know, in the virtual world. And so I kind of realized this. I didn't, I actually got to this realization through my Patreon and through really exploring with these people why they were taking these adventure games and going and just, sitting around and role playing inside of a tavern and hanging out and, working on their tan or something in the TTRPG, right? Or going fishing or whatever. I never understood that. And it's because that's the fantasy, London says, I remember when you had that realization. Yeah, this was a little while ago. I'm just kind of resharing it. But yes, it was Gid was definitely involved. That is 100% true. And a number of patrons were. And so again, this channel's for entertaining and education, and I learned stuff too, and I grow and develop. That doesn't necessarily mean that's something I still don't necessarily want to do it. I still think it's kind of boring, but I understand, right? And I think gaining understanding is valuable, even if it doesn't necessarily change how you are going to, what you enjoy or what you want to act on. Gaining that understanding, I think, is important. GM Scott, when we were talking about the things, the nutritious gray protein paste on the Nebuchadnezzar versus Cypher's rare filet mignon. Right, exactly. Rare filet mignon. Exactly. It has all the essential proteins, amino acids, and stuff that the body needs. It does not have all the body needs. Anyone want to go fishing? I'm always down to fish. Cold drinks, a few laughs, I'm assuming, and a quiet lake. Yeah. For sure. And what I've discovered? I know that this steak isn't real. I know that the Matrix is only telling me that it is juicy and delicious. And you know what I've discovered? Ignorance is bliss. Beowulf says, I think this might be why actor stance immersive players love slice of life too. We can burn out on the adventure stuff and heavy drama. Sometimes we need to step back and have a breather. Yeah, and I mean, to be clear, I think, people call these the beach episodes, right? And I do think that, there's something to be said about having breaks in the tension and having moments where, that stuff can sort of, you have a chance to breathe. You have a chance to lay out. I've said before, I was running a Scum and Villainy game online, and it basically failed because everything was just so high stakes, high tension. And even though the characters weren't really like trying to save the universe or anything like that, they were just trying to create a really souped up space racer. I kind of kept the gas pedal down a little too hard. And if I'm going to critique Blades in the Dark / Forge in the Dark games, those game mechanics are designed to push the accelerator, to keep escalating things, to keep things spiraling, to make you feel like you're juggling more and more and more and more plates. And when I was playing with people, mostly, right, young fathers with, young kids, the last thing that they fucking needed was more plates to juggle. So it makes total sense to me why they all kind of, 86'd it and said, Derek, my life is stressful enough. I don't need a stressful game too. Makes total sense. It was a very eye-opening moment, right? People engage with these games because they're looking for a release. They are looking for something they are not getting in their day-to-day life, in theory. Unless you're really, you want more of the same. It was me, y'all. It wasn't just you, Tim, right? It was Kaz. It was Smith. It was, maybe it wasn't George, but it was all of you to a certain extent. I suspect most people yearn for a balance, says Scouse Glenn. I suspect most people yearn for a balance between quiet and loud scenarios. Fishing or cooking a nice supper is a good contrast to fighting goblins and bandits. Yeah, I do think, you have to be careful, though, because I think you can get into a weird, tonal disconnect. The other problem is that a lot of those things that like fishing and cooking are typically one-person affairs, right? Like combat, one of the reasons combat's great is because combat's a team sport, and it kind of brings everybody in. Whereas like fishing or cooking is oftentimes just, one person and because of that, the mechanics aren't really that deep, and it just becomes basically like, make a roll. And you're like, I mean, is this really that exciting? Fuck Blitzball. Fuck Final Fantasy X and fuck Blitzball. But yes, I mean, I do think that people want a balance. But again, it can be tough. It can be tough to strike that balance, because if you do it too little, the game can lose urgency and it can feel like, what are we even doing here? But if you don't do it enough, the game can be so stressful and it feels like it's burned out. And then even when you do introduce these mechanics, it could bore other people. So, that it is a balance. It is a tough act to balance. A fishing side scene is not about fishing. It's about having a backdrop for more FBT. Now, FBT aside, one of the reasons why I really like, a game like Avatar Legends is because Avatar Legends has these mechanics built into it that are going to push you and encourage you to have these quiet moments, especially like during a journey. And I think somebody had mentioned earlier the Adventures in Middle-earth RPG, which basically Lord of the Rings 5e. And in those games, they have some specific mechanics that are really designed to mechanically interact with those interactions between the party members while they're traveling. Same thing is true with, obviously, Fabula Ultima, when you have your so-called camp scenes and you can make bonds. Now, to be clear, there's no real, bonds matter and bonds have a mechanic, but there's not really like an interaction, like there's no mechanical rules interaction as such. You kind of just describe what you're talking about and you have your bond and then you increase the bond. Whereas if we were playing Avatar Legends and we came out of, remember we were talking about like the tension curve, right? If we just had this really tense moment back at the Earth Kingdom city that we failed to liberate from the Fire Nation and we were forced to, flee. And now we have to kind of like head back to where we came from with our heads down low. And the GM could cut to that next scene, but this is a quieter moment and we give those players that moment. But it also gives them that moment to potentially make guide and comfort moves that they can use to recover from the conditions that they gain during that scene. But the cool thing about it is you're still engaging with the mechanics. There's still uncertainty because those guide and comfort moves could spawn GM moves. They could spawn 7, 8s, and 9s, and it may not exactly, be the kind of perfect recovery that you're hoping for, So I think that, this goes way back to the thing, which is I think quiet moments are important for journeys and traveling. But I do think that at the end of the day, it's still a lot more compelling if there's something at stake. There's a question that, because even if you don't involve the dice, right? Completely ignore the dice. Let's say there's no game mechanics. So I don't know that we're going to create a new term here, but there's FBT that matters and then there's FBT that doesn't matter. Okay. And for people who are not familiar with it, FBT means fluffy bullshit time. And I'm not saying that despondently. I'm just saying fluffy bullshit time is when it doesn't have to even be talking in character. If I am attacking in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition or in Pathfinder 2nd edition, and I say, my barbarian rages and closes the distance in lightning speed. I leap into the air. I grab my axe with 2 hands and I bring it down. That description was fluffy bullshit time. Those descriptions are awesome. They're part of what make the game so much fun. But it doesn't mechanically affect the game in any way. So we're talking in character, okay? And we could be talking about, and I mean this, absolutely nothing. We are literally just bullshitting because we're living in this pretend world and we just want to talk about something stupid. That to me is like horrible and worse. But if we had a moment where it's like, we need to decide what we're going to do next. We could have this conversation as players, and I would be fine with that. But if we're like, and you actually have players, or at least PCs, who are in disagreement, 2 people think that you should go back to the elves for support, and another player says that is out of the question. We need to go back and we need to get our revenge. Then having that conversation in character, even with though there are no dice involved, is still a meaningful bout of decision making, because you're debating a course of action. You're trying to, come up with some sort of resolution. So that to me is way more interesting than just small talk, basically. It'll be fun to talk about the weather. It'll be fun to, so how about those guardians? Like that's the kind of FBT that I really want to avoid, because that to me is just wasting time. Even if you're playing in your character, and that's what my character would say. I find that to be very boring. Yeah. Spiky bullshit time. Kinda. Hey, Darth Gorlock. Oh, thank you, buddy.
Darth Gorlock tipped $40. Missed the stream, but just wanted to show the support for the GM streams.
Well, thank you, Darth Gorlock. We kind of ended up talking a little bit about more personal stuff, but the first hour and a half is really me talking about some of the fundamental problems that these games have with, and why the games are set up in a way to sort of trivialize and make the non-dungeon type adventures feel boring, is because they're supposed to be. It's supposed to be a grind. It's supposed to be a hurdle. It's supposed to be something that you want to skip. And part of the fun of leveling up and gaining new powers and gaining new spells and gaining new magic items and gaining money is that you can bypass automatically the parts of the game that you don't really enjoy, which in theory is supposed to be the journey. So then when you force people to go on those journeys, but you don't change any of the rules around them, it can feel kind of pointless, because you're like, well, we're not going to run out of food. Nothing here is going to kill us. We really can't get lost because we're on a grid. Like, what are we even doing here? Like, what's the point of this activity? And I think that, you need to really take a step back and evaluate. And I don't want to say that this is a cop-out answer. It's that I just think that, fundamentally, that a lot of the tropes that have been put into D&D make it hard, to make these non-dungeon adventures work in the context of that game. Now, there may be games like Adventures in Middle-earth, which have some pretty substantial, what you would call, I guess, house rules to the 5e system. And if you're willing to really shake that up, go for it. You could see a great example of this with Quest for the Frozen Flame. When I ran that for my group, it was supposed to be Hexploration, but it's Pathfinder 2, and Hexploration doesn't really work, in my personal opinion. So I had to include a bunch of board game mechanics that I stole from Battlestar Galactica to make these ad hoc, abstract concepts of resources to make it interesting, because I wanted to give the players meaningful decisions. And without meaningful decisions, you don't have agency. And without agency, it just feels like you're just, walking through the GM's random encounter table. And that never feels fun. Maybe it's fun for a little bit, but ultimately it's not fun. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like those games where it's just like, well, what's your campaign? It's just me rolling a bunch of random tables. So those to me are very uninteresting, because how am I supposed to make decisions knowing about the future if the future is literally completely just a random set of procedures? Now I've done a stream on this before. There is a way to sort of get around that, which is dynamic random encounters. And again, random encounters don't have to be just combats, but oh damn, I'm throwing shade at my random encounter table games. No. Because, number one, I have done it many times myself, okay? Number two, I think they can work. I just think that we have to give the players a way to meaningfully influence the way that they interact with and experience those random encounters. If the group, can take actions or use their resources, or use a clever idea, and that has an impact on the type of random encounters that they have, or the frequency of random encounters they have, or the severity of random encounters that they have, or the component type of random encounters that they have, that can, and they're aware of those interactions, then that can suddenly become very powerful, because now you feel like the world is chaos, but we have a way to control the chaos. And being able to control chaos feels powerful. And so I think that is one of the reasons why I really like that style of play. But I really appreciate the use of, dynamic random encounters. Not all the time, but the random encounters just also need to tie together to create a cohesive world. And you know what? I completely agree with you. And let me give you a good example. Going back to, so this is an example of where, I don't know if call it fudging or not. I don't know where I put this window. That's not it. Oh, it was here. I was in the wrong scene. I got to go back. So if I go to here, okay, there we go. Bloop. All right, so back to our Forbidden Lands. So this town, okay, did not exist, but the group, I think they were here. Okay, they were camped at this. And I think Smith rolled really well for his his survival check to make a camp, and I think he got now in the game you either succeed or you don't succeed. You either get 1 6 or you don't get any 6s. But Smith got 3 6s or 4 6s. So I was like, oh, you find a great place right by the river. It's protected. The river moves really shallow. And there's you can see that it's teeming with fish. This is the water seems really fresh. And they were basically like, oh, this is a sweet place to camp. We should just keep coming back here. So Aaron's character's name is Lar. So they called this place Camp Lar. Anyways, and so it got a place on the map. Anyways, the first night that they were here, I rolled a random encounter from the Forbidden Lands book. And the Forbidden Lands book random encounter is something like, refugees from a town called Freygrove. It's a random encounter. So obviously, I had to make a town called Freygrove. And then obviously I had to make up what they were fleeing from and what the whole situation was. So that all kind of, came out of, ex nihilo because of a random encounter. I made it internally consistent with the world, and the group basically knew that this was a random encounter. They didn't know that they didn't think I was reading this out of the book. They knew it was a random encounter, but it shaped the game and it was fine. Okay. Months later, the group is exploring Weatherstone, which is a dungeon. And when they first went in there, they met this bard who had said I'm just hanging out here. I was here with actually another group of adventurers. They went in, they kind of ignored my advice and they went in. So I don't think they're going to do that well. They might die. So the group goes in, the PCs, and they get their ass kicked by some demonic vines, and they decide discretion is better. They kill the vines, but they decide we're not going to go any further. And so when they return, when they leave Weatherstone, they travel back over to this hex to make camp for the night. They don't want to camp outside of the cursed dungeon, the cursed castle. And the bard comes with them and says, I'll share your campfire for one more night, and then I gotta get going. Well, that night I rolled for random encounters, and guess what? They're in grasslands, so I rolled on the same encounter table that I had rolled so many months ago over here at Camp Lar. And what do I get? Refugees from Freygrove. That's what the random encounter from the book says that I'm using from the GMG, from the Oracle. Obviously, that makes no sense. Number one, they know where Freygrove is. Number two, this has already happened in the game. Refugees from Freygrove. So what did I describe? I described that the surviving members of this adventuring party, who had been otherwise killed and torn apart by the horrors inside of the castle, came limping into the light of their campfire. They weren't refugees. They weren't from Freygrove. The spirit of the random encounter remained the same, but it felt, and the players know that this was a random encounter, and they even know, I was like, oh man, it's refugees from Freygrove, and everyone's laughing. They're like, oh, you're far away from home. Instead, though, I said, okay, but you know what? Actually, what we're going to make is, these are the remaining members of that adventuring party. They're refugees from the dungeon that you guys were just in. And, we turned into a little bit of a role-playing type scenario, and there were some checks made. They helped the people out, and they gave them some information. And the group even said, hey, the surviving members, you guys go east till you hit the river, and follow the river down until you reach our stronghold, and tell them that, we sent you, and, they'll give you, shelter and food and supply, and maybe you guys can come work with us. And so it turned into this, not only did it turn into a cool little encounter, it turned into sort of a recruiting thing, but it was totally random, and the players knew that, but it felt way better because it tied into something that they already knew about the game. They knew that this adventuring party had gone into the dungeon before them. They knew that they were not prepared for the dangers and the challenges within. And so to see the surviving members of that adventuring band come limping into their campfire at night, it made sense, and it tied the world together and allowed us to kind of tell a more cohesive story, even though it was random. So that's where I think the real skill of GMing comes. It's because anybody can just roll on a random encounter table and read what's in the book. Where I think the fun of the game, not just the challenge, but the fun of the game of being a dungeon master, is taking these separated, these different ideas and random charts and tables, and, as Darth Gorlock said, making them tie together, shaping it into a cohesive world that we are building collaboratively together. This didn't exist until we just rolled this random encounter together. And now we have to work together to sort of make it make sense. And I think that's a lot of fun, personally. Let's see here. Pacing in games is very important. That's why people love fishing in their RPGs. I did say something the other day. I was like, I realized the one way that we can make Dragon Tide, right, which is our naval sort of exploration, naval adventure game that we're going to do as a mega game for Dragon Tide, for Dragonbane. I was like, oh, this is the perfect opportunity. We've always joked about it in Northern Reaches, but now is the time. Dragonbane being a game about boats and ships in the oceans, fishing mini game. It's got to be there for people to finally, that'll be the thing that'll get people to really sign up, will be the fishing minigame. Yeah, I joined Dragon Tide. I've never gone adventuring once, but you should see my record sea bass. And I'm still hoping to catch a blue marlin. It's going to be quite the accomplishment. Did you make or remake this map yourself? It looks like Incarnate. I did not make this map. That map was provided by Free League. It is the Forbidden Lands, the Ravenlands default map. I did make some changes to it with Photoshop, but nothing of like the graphics. I swapped some locations and used some content-aware fill and some generative fill to make it blend in and fit, well. Yeah, I could also do that, but I mean, look, Gonzo, you're absolutely right. In fact, you could take that any number of directions that you want and just be like, there's multiple Frey Groves, and there was never a Frey Grove. It's just a delusion that you guys keep having. I don't, something, they're trapped in a mirror dimension. They're cursed to follow you around. You could do that, but the issue with removing duplicates from RET is that rolling the same result multiple times does tell you something about your world. Well, that's right. It depends on how specific your table is. In the case of the Forbidden Lands, this is very specifically refugees from the town of Freygrove. And I agree that I don't necessarily want to remove duplicates. There are times and places when I use a dynamic random encounter table where I will specify that an encounter is a unique occurrence and that it is to be struck from the table after I'm done and replaced with something else. There are other times, though, like if this is a region that is known for its orc activity, there are numerous orc tribes that live in this area. Most of the time they fight each other. They can be a nuisance. They can raid small villages or farmsteads. They occasionally will even attack a merchant, caravan. But they're only really a threat when like they get, united together under a powerful leader. Well, if there's a lot of orcs in this region, then I don't want to like have the orc encounter and then remove it from my random encounter table, because then you're not going to experience orcs again. And part of the whole point of the dynamic random encounter table is that you're going to experience orcs a lot. And that's going to make you have that feel of, oh, this is a very orc heavy, orc infested, if you will, area or region. Let's see here. I mean, I don't know how, Mike, I mean, I like to eat fish raw as well. I mean, a lot of people do. Little sushi action. So yeah, so cool stream. Kind of last minute, but thanks everybody for hanging out. Again, going to Gen Con tomorrow. Kind of weirdly excited / nervous. I mean, it is a horrible time. I mean, I made the decision to be like, I am going to go to Gen Con. I bought the badge. Screw it. You know, I'm going to go not the way I want to go, which is convenient and close and with all my stuff and my games and run all my stuff. I'm just going to go as like a, vagabond. Then, of course, obviously my house caught on fire, or my garage caught on fire, which is my house. I mean, it's connected. And it kind of just threw everything for a loop. And I was going to completely back out of it. But we had folks come in, folks like John, folks like Erica, GM Scott, so many people who just came up with some huge donations. Lollipop. I mean, everybody. I mean, the number of people who came in there was crazy. And so that little financial boost meant actually that the effect of having that fire and potentially being underinsured because of my fucking HOA changing the law and changing the rules without me knowing wasn't a financial disaster as it was. So you guys saved my ass on that one. So suddenly I'm going to Gen Con. And so, this was kind of a thrown together stream, but I enjoyed having the time to talk with you. So I'm going to be at Gen Con. I am going to try to do maybe do some interviewing with some people there. Let me know. Patrons, go over to KLLC content chat. If you're going to Gen Con, or even if you don't go to Gen Con, everyone's at Gen Con. Write some people in KLLC content chat. You can ping me, ping Derek. Who should I try to get, a KOLC interview with? Presumably they're going to be busy. I'm not going to, I'm going to ask them. They may say no. But I'm going to try to catch them either in the hall or, maybe, figure out a way to get a few minutes with them. But let me know who you think I should get, because if I could get to like 10, maybe 10 or 15 people, I think that would be a pretty good, amount to have, a dozen or so. So let me know who you think I should talk to. Maybe if you know what the Gen Con booth map is, if you know what companies are there, if you know if there's anybody special there, let me know. Cause I think maybe I'll make it a point to try to go capture the interview. Additionally, might be a patron only stream. I'm going to be driving to Indy tomorrow. So I might do a car live stream or like a car chat hangout with the patrons. So I don't know yet. I will see how I'm feeling, if I'm just going to jam some music. But, if I'm out there and I get a little bored in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday, I might pull over, hit the bathroom and, grab a freshy boy of soda and then, get a stream started. Not a lot on YouTube if you're will. I'm just saying, I wouldn't be on YouTube. I would just have my phone and my microphone and I could just, I could just talk. Also, have I done a stream from the car before? Oh no. Smith used to do YouTube shorts while he was driving to work. Like Mark Rosewater. Mark Rosewater used to do his blog or his podcast, which was called Drive to Work. And he would literally he'd start every podcast by going, all right, I'm pulling out of my driveway. You know what that means? It's the drive to work. And his podcast would always just be his drive to work. Just interview random people walking around. Interesting. All right, fine. Darth Gorlock. I don't hate that because I could totally just be like, hey, hi, my name is Derek Valenda. I have a small YouTube channel. I'm just talking to people at Gen Con and I just have some quick questions to ask them. Fine. Tell me what are the kind of questions I should ask random Gen Con goers? I want to know what John Smith's opinion on the current RPG climate is. Ooh, okay. So you just want to be like, hey, so what are you here for? And then they go, I'm here for board games. And I'm like, it was great talking to you. An interview with Mr. Galato is a must, right? I mean, if he'll have me, I'd like to think he would give me some time of day, right? At this rate, I'm due to be taken out anyways, Kyle. We're okay here. Yeah. Derek ride along. Exactly. Help break up the monotony. It's that drive, I'm driving through Ohio. So it's like, as soon as I leave Cleveland, it's cornfields, You get a little bit of a respite when you're at the edge of Columbus, and then it's soybean and corn all the way across Ohio, Indianapolis, all the way through Indianapolis, and then finally you get to Indiana, and then finally you get to Indianapolis, and there's a little bit of city life. Exactly. You know, the fire tried to take me down. The swindlers on YouTube or on Amazon tried to steal my Riz, and my battery just gave up the ghost. So, you know, going to Riz this up in Ohio on God for real. Yeah. So yeah, listen, I wouldn't call it a London hour, but maybe I'll hop in. Maybe that's what I'll just do. I'll just jump into a Discord chat channel and we can all just hang out. So maybe that's what I will do, Kyle. That doesn't sound too bad either. All right, folks, I got to pack because I am not packed. And I gotta bathe my dog because I told my housemate that I would bathe the dog. I gotta bathe my dog tonight. I'm gonna take a shower, and then I gotta pack. And it's so weird. Packing is like normally it's a very I like have huge checklists, and I'm bringing all these different games that I want to play and that I have to play, and games that I promised that I was going to run for people, and I just don't have anything to do. I started with the idea of I'm still going incognito, Gonzo. That's why I can do this, because normally going to a convention is kind of a job for me, right? I'm there to run games. I'm there to attend certain events. I have no events scheduled. I have no plans with anyone, even the patrons. I mean, if we, again, patrons, we should totally hang out. But like normally there's like an official Knights of Last Call meetup and a happy hour, buying drinks or dinners and stuff. I am just flying completely under the radar. So that means I have all the time in the world. Now I could just go to Gen Con and be like, oh my God, I'm at Gen Con. But I'm not trying to like seem like a dick here. But I've been to Gen Con like 20 plus times. So like 21 times or something like that. 22. I don't know. I missed a couple years there during COVID. So the newness of Gen Con is pretty, worn off on me. So, and there's a lot of cool stuff in the booth and the halls, but these days, a lot of that stuff, you can just buy it. You can buy it before it even goes to Gen Con. The era of the Gen Con release is, pretty dead. Like, for example, Paizo's big release at Gen Con is Player Core 2, which all the people who are Paizo subscribers and pre-orderers have already got their book or they've got their PDF because it shipped. So the idea of it being, and I've already seen it, you know what I mean? So like, it's not like this cool thing. Like it's crazy to me. People are like, oh, I'm going to wait in line to get this book. It's like, you can just buy that book off of like Amazon. Like there's no reason for you to buy it at Gen Con at all. And then a lot of booths at Gen Con nowadays don't have anything to sell. They are just hype booths for their upcoming Kickstarter. And they want to just build the hype and talk to people to try to build a groundswell of sort of grassroots activity by, hyping it up at Gen Con. So there's not even as much stuff for me to buy. When I find a new thing that I truly is a new thing for me, that is a rare experience. Long story short, I think I might end up being a little bored, which is why I'm going to bring a camera and I'm going to bring my microphone, and we'll try to do some interviews. Or at the very least, I can just hang out with Steven Glicker and he and I can just shoot the shit for an hour or two, and I'll post that on YouTube. When we get back, let's do a Fate stream. John, absolutely. I said that before. I said, maybe, not that I'm doing it wrong, but John, I think I am still very influenced by the pre-Fate core, like Fate 1.0, Fate 2.0, right? I'm talking about like the, what was it called? Like the Mind Jammer, Spirit of the Century era Fate, Starblazer Adventures. I think that is the Fate that like kind of has shaped my view of Fate. And I do think that Fate Core actually is a bigger change. And I obviously own Fate Core and I've run it, but maybe I missed something. And I think we talked about this and how it'd be good for me to get, Dresden Dresden Files. Although I don't like Dresden Files, but I didn't play Dresden Files. But yeah. So I think I'm kind of locked into that version of Fate. Yeah, Starblazer Adventures was really cool. What was another one? Strands of Fate. That was like a variant of Fate at that time. And I just rolled a random encounter, and it's you. Hey, how's it going? My name is Derek Melinda. Night's Last Call. Welcome. I could get it signed to Gen Con. Getting things that signed to Gen Con is cool. I will admit, but some of that is just worn off as I've gotten older as well. D&D 2024 is releasing at Gen Con, though. It's the biggest release ever. I mean, they're only releasing 750 books a day, and you have to enter a contest at like 7 a.m. just to get a ticket to be able to buy the book. I think it's just a publicity stunt more than anything. Oh, yeah, Diaspora. I have Diaspora. Holy crap. That's the one, the cover, it's got like the circles that are connected with the lines, and then there's like the other lines. Yeah, oh my God, Diaspora was awesome. That was a cool game. That was like Fate Traveler. It's crazy how both remasters for PF2E, 5E are both coming out around now. It's true. And it's going to be crazy too. Like next year, we're going to get the MCDM RPG, which, by the way, somehow, as horrible of a name as MCDM is for their RPG, and how I said, oh, everyone's just going to call it that. That's probably what they're just going to call it. Somehow they managed to come up with a worse name. Draw Steel is horrible. Draw Steel, the RPG, Draw Steel. I don't know. I think it's a terrible name. Anyways, but next year you're going to have like Daggerheart, probably Daggerheart, DC-20, Draw Steel, all releasing. So, these things kind of become cyclical and cyclical. To be fair, though, Darth Gorlock, it isn't crazy. The remasters occurred because 5e was coming out with a new game, right? The 5e wanted to come out with a new version of D&D, so they tried to cancel the OGL, which is why Pathfinder and Paizo started spinning around and trying to make their, remaster. They were like, well, we were going to do it anyways. No, they weren't. That's true. We also get the Starfinder playtest stuff this week. I'm sorry, Draw Steel. Yeah, the MCDM is now called Draw Steel. Not a fan. Oh yeah. Trajan, yes, Stormlight as well. I think I'm sleeping on that because I'm not a big Brandon Sanderson fan, but I think that also will have potentially a lot of draw. Now, a lot of these things may end up being flash in the pans, and never really go anything, and people just go back to playing D&D, Yeah, I'm just going to call it the MCDM RPG. Yeah, it is seriously called that. It is called Draw Steel. Well said. Darth Gorlock says, yeah, I was saying that in the Discord. If they were going to pick such a shit name, they shouldn't have waited so long. That you're absolutely right. I mean, the name would be bad regardless, I think. But the fact that we had to wait this long, and it was kind of a meme that it was even called MCDM RPG. The idea that, by the way, it was called MCDM RPG, the RPG is in my mind, what it was going to be called. The name of the game was MCDM RPG, the RPG. So yeah, Draw Steel. I think if they've released the name, I don't think they're going to go back on it. I mean, some of these names are actually completely horrible. I mean, let's call it like it. I'm going to call it like it is. I actually don't know if DC-20 stands for anything or if it doesn't stand for Dungeon Coach 20. It's a terrible name. DC-20, terrible name. Draw Steel, terrible name. Daggerheart is S tier name. That is such a good name for a game, for an RPG. Daggerheart is just solid. It's phenomenal. Well, Stormlight is named after, obviously, the Stormlight Archives, but that's totally acceptable. So that's just, named after the book. I have no idea if it's any good, and I haven't looked at it, but Tales of the Valiant, great name. Advanced 5e, Level Up 5e or whatever, terrible name. Some of these names have fallen really, really, really flat. If there's a new game coming out that I missed, throw it in chat. I'll sort of break it. DC20 is the new EZD6. Yeah, I mean, EZD6 was like contrast EZD6 with Year Zero engine, right? The Year Zero engine, that's great. That's great. Sort of derivative for Mutant Year Zero. They're calling it an engine. It's great. What makes Daggerheart S tier? Well, number one, it's a cool name. Daggerheart sounds very cool. Number two, to me, it sort of speaks to what I think the game is going to be about, right? Which is combat and, emotional, character-driven moments. And so I think it gives a good impression that what this game is about, right? It's about, stabbing people in the heart, both literally and figuratively. Nimble 5e. I mean, at least you got to give them credit for, doing what the name says on the tin. That's not a great name. Nimble wouldn't be a good name, but Nimble 5e is definitely not a good name. When's the last time we even found a path? Great question. What are they finding in Pathfinder? Nothing. Again, like Pathfinder's weird, right? Because Pathfinder, the RPG, came out as a result of like the Pathfinder Society, which was like a group of, sort of an adventurers guild spread across Galarian. And so calling it the Pathfinder RPG was just because that was kind of already their established IP of adventurers. So I never really actually thought Pathfinder was actually a great name for a game. I will say that there was a company called Bad Axe Games, not Ass Games, Bad Axe Games. They released like their Pathfinder version of Pathfinder, and they called it Trailblazer, which I think was a great play on Pathfinder. Pathfinder was Pathfinder. This is called Trailblazer. Five Torches Deep is a fantastic name, and Five Torches Deep is also a great name because you can abbreviate it 5TD, and like literally the number 5 TD, and calling it 5TD is just a great abbreviation that everybody knows what it is. But it is a great thing, So I think Five Torches Deep is a good name. The game itself is fine. I think there's a lot of interesting things in it, and it's definitely very different. Shadowdark. I find the name funny, actually. Yeah, I mean, Shadowdark, it's kind of like saying the same thing twice, right? Gloom, shadow, gloom, dark. The game could have been called Gloom Dark. I mean, now in theory, calling it Shadow Dark is because like the whole thing here is about the torches. Thing is, though, and I might have missed something, the torches are supposed to be real-time torches, except when they're not. Because the game even says, like, well, if, a lot of time passes, then you should also mark more torches. So that's number one. Number two is, I don't think the torches are, like, particularly cumbersome, and an hour is a long time. If you play the game for 4 hours, that's 4 torches for, like, the whole party. It's kind of not really that much of a thing. Now, when we played Shadowdark at Origins, we played Shadowdark Extreme, and I had a 10-minute egg timer, or hourglass, that I would use, and they had only 10-minute torches, which is also probably more accurate, because I really don't think torches like burn for an hour. I think most of them probably burn for like 10 to 15 minutes. Not that I'm like some medieval historian, but generally speaking, I would think that it would probably be about 10 minutes. And I think the game's great in that sense. It's going to win a million Ennies, and Kelsey is amazing. She actually is really cool. The story behind Daggerheart's name is pretty goofy, but they stuck the landing. I don't actually know the story behind Daggerheart's name. Outgunned, Outgunned's a good name, especially for that tone of game. I think Broken Compass was better, but Outgunned isn't bad. You forgot the essence of the game. It's about the cones. I'm going to move my Maverick to the Devil's Lair, which will move my Pirate to the Ocean Hex, which will push my farmer, yes, my humble farmer, directly into the central cone. Anyways, Anthony says, Doug had so much fun playing Shadow Dark and Origins, by the way. I got to get him back to the table now. He did great. I thought he was, he wasn't going to have like a great moment, but he ended up having a couple of really cool, great character moments. And, sometimes that's all it takes for TTRPGs. It's just like when you go, I had this one experience that I never have experienced before in a game. And that is oftentimes enough to get people hooked. So I thought he did. I thought everybody did really well, but I was really happy with his play. So you did a good job. You can tell him I said that. Yeah, I like Outgunned. It summarizes what the game's exactly about. That's also just like one of those things that you were saying, when you'd hear like, we're outnumbered, we're outgunned, right? So the game could have probably been called Outnumbered, but Outgunned gives you more of a sense of that action shooting thing. So Outnumbered and Outgunned is a great way to put it. Wilder Feast. I actually don't know what that game is, so I can't really comment on whether it's a good name or not. The best name I've ever seen for a game was Dungeons, the Dragoning, 40,000 7th edition. All right, that's pretty amazing. Wild Sea is a great name. Wild Sea is S tier. Wild Sea is A+. It is calling it the Wild Sea, and it's this verdant forest ocean. Very good. And the name Wild Sea itself connotes this idea of adventure, and I think it's really, really good. Through the Hedgerow, another game I don't know, but I assume it maybe has something to do with like going to a mystical land of fairy, in which case it's pretty okay. Girl by Moonlight drew my interest by name alone. Yeah, that's pretty good. Girl by Moonlight I think is really good. Hero Quest, not an RPG, but great name. There actually is a Hero Quest RPG. All right, Daniel coming in with some what sounds to be authentic. A torch made of wood, cloth, twine, and resin will burn for an hour at least, sometimes up to 2 or 3. Well, so there you go. There you go. I was wrong, but not only that, so was Kelsey Dion. Apparently, torches should burn for hours. Let's see here. Andrew said, if you hate this name, you'll probably hate the game. Blaze in the Dark is a sick name. John Harper creates incredible names for his games. I mean, Lasers and Feelings, Danger Patrol, Aegon, Blaze in the Dark. There's so many good John Harper games. They just have like the best names. He's so good. Derek likes adjective, noun, and noun. Well, that's because they tend to work pretty well. Legend of the Five Rings is good. Genesis is designed to be generic. I don't hate Genesis. I like Fate is better as a generic game system. Wild Sea sounds good. Got to consider the Sonics of a name. Numenera is a good. Actually, I agree with that. Numenera sounds mysterious, and it gives this idea. I think Numenera is okay. Dolmenwood. No, Dolmenwood doesn't mean anything to me, so I don't really know what that means. Shadow of the Weird Wizard is bad. I thought Shadow of the Demon Lord was a good name. Calling it Shadow of the Weird Wizard was a miss for me. Genesis literally means generic system. Well, there you go. I think Sword World is named after another game, though. Or it's named after an IP. Yeah, I mean, D&D is... part of it is nostalgia, of course, but yeah, calling a game Dungeons and back in that time period, you also had Tunnels and Trolls. Now, it's the same basic idea, right? Dungeons and Dragons, Tunnels and Trolls. But tell me which one of those names is better, right? Also, I think D&D comes from a history of sword and sorcery, and so like calling something S&S or D&D, it always sort of, kind of came out of that. A lot, can't forget Mazes and Monsters, Dungeons and Dragons, Tunnels and Trolls, right? It was all just, that's the way they did it. A lot of the COC World of Darkness names slap too. I agree. Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf, the Apocalypse. I only know the old ones. Wraith the Oblivion, Changeling the Dream. I might be getting some of those wrong, but the original ones I thought were really cool. Hunter the Reckoning. Those are pretty cool. Having those little subtitles, I think, is cool. King Arthur Pendragon 6th edition. Don't like it. I like it should just be called Pendragon. I thought it was just called Pendragon. If I go look at my book, does it say King Arthur Pendragon? I think it should just be called Pendragon. Calling it King Arthur Pendragon, I'm not a fan of that. Changeling the Dreaming is lit as fuck. Yeah, I agree. Changeling the Dreaming is lit as fuck. I would never want to play it, but it's pretty cool. Oh, Mage the Awakening. That's pretty cool. Let's see here. And to be clear, I liked the original or old World of Darkness names better than the new ones, right? So like, I think now it's called like Vampire the Requiem or something. That is way worse than Vampire the Masquerade. So, yeah. Ogres and Oubliettes, that's pretty good. Bunnies and Burrows, that was a real game. Castles and Crusades, right? You know, it just works. I don't know. Castles and Crusades. But the problem with that is like, are you really going on a crusade? How often are you dealing with a castle? At least in theory, in Dungeons and Dragons. Dragons were kind of like, you know, the big scary monster, kind of almost like the default BBEG. And dungeons are where you went. How many people are playing Castles and Crusades? And I know it was based off of the Castles and Crusade Society, but I think the Castles and Crusade Society was primarily a wargaming hobby. And so calling a game wargaming hobby Castles and Crusades, especially if you're doing, I don't know, a lot of reconstruction of medieval, you know, Christian Islamic wars in the Middle East and the Near East, makes sense if your game is called, your gaming community is called Castles and Crusades. Calling your tabletop role-playing game where you may not do much with castles or crusades does seem a little bit strange. Candela Obscura. It's okay. I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's great. 7th Sea, very good. I agree. Cairn. It's weird because I can't say that name well. Cairn. I don't know. It doesn't roll off the tongue for me. Legends of the Mist, not great. Legends of the Mist is not a great name. City of Mist is a better name. Legends in the Mist, it's two word. Ars Magica, depends on how you pronounce it, right? Legend, the Mist would be better. It's called Ebоnclad, which to this day is the best name for a TTUP-related Earther. Yeah, it's pretty good. Ebоnclad's good. I mean, Earth Dawn, I mean, I can't speak to Shadowrunning as much, but Earth Dawn is like awesome. Number one, it's a great name for an RPG. Number two, it's literally named after an airship in the RPG. But the third thing is it's also symbolic of what the RPG is about. It's about a bunch of people who have just survived essentially a magical holocaust, and they are kind of coming out of their fallout shelters to the dawn of a new world. And so every part of Earth Dawn is just so great. And it's noun. So it sounds cool. Earth Dawn's good. Earth Dawn's great. We got to do that Earth Dawn stream. Boy, we got to do that Earth Dawn stream. We got to get Donnie on here, and we got to do Earth Dawn, and it's going to be like a 9-part series, because I am going to spend like a whole 3 hours just talking about like patterns and true names and what it means to be a name giver and how all of this matters diegetically in the game. Thirsty Sword Lesbians. I mean, it got a lot of clout. I mean, the only problem I have with Thirsty Sword Lesbians is that it does kind of self-select. And I know what they say in the book is, you know, it's not, you don't just have to be a thirsty sword lesbian, but I do think that it's a little too on the nose with the name. I think they could have come up with a better name, but you know, it's proud to be what it is. And I do respect that. I actually don't think Burning Wheel is a great name. It sounds like a racing game. Torchbearer, great name. Mouse Guard, great name. Burning Wheel, you know, I know Luke's got this whole thing with the hub and the spokes and the character burner. You're gonna go burn a character. I love Luke Crane. I hate that shit. Hub, spokes, burn a character. Whatever. Come on. You're creating a character. You're not creating a character, you're burning it. Stop. You're embarrassing yourself. I love TSL. It's so in your face about what it's about. It forces people to talk about it. Absolutely. And that, again, I also think it's got some really cool mechanics. So it is really good. Apocalypse Keys is a miss. it's a cool idea, and I get what they're trying to do for it, but the keys, the name, it's not good. I don't think it's good. All right. Well, 10 o'clock, 3 hours. I'm going to go pack. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out tonight. It was really, really awesome. Sorry for, again, if you clicked on this and you want all this stuff, hopefully you enjoyed the first 90 minutes to an hour, or to 2 hours. I know the last hour or so has just been kind of miscellaneous hanging out, but that's what happens when you get a bunch of friends together and we all like to shoot shit and kind of talk. I want to say thank you to Dr. Metropolis, Mike T, Damian Williams, C-Cal, Lollipop, Alternate Game Master, BitShift, Sunhawk, GM Scott, and Darth Gorlock for their tips, their comments, their super chats. You all really made this a surprise little win of a stream. A little bit extra spending money as I go to Gen Con, and who the hell knows what's going to happen. Again, maybe history will happen. In later news, Derek Melinda was escorted off the premises after starting to berate somebody about why they fudged so much. I may do some sort of minor stream or something on Thursday, but I haven't decided yet. If I do, it'll be like Vegas stream. I know we've done a couple of things from Gen Con and Origins where we had like a big setup with mics and a camera. This would be like when I'm in Vegas and I've got my my camera, or I've got my cell phone and it's just a quick live stream. Note to self: do not include anything in the title that may attract an army of bots and generic weirdos, and I have no way to moderate because that was a disaster. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining. Thanks again to Darth Gorlock for the tip, but also for the suggestion for this stream. I think there's more to talk about here, but again, I kind of threw this together last minute, and I didn't have as much time to put together some notes as I usually do. Pants are optional, Jackal. Yes. It's a shame that stream, the chat on that stream is lost to the ether. If you weren't there, you didn't get to see it. But I do think that this is an interesting topic because I think that there's a lot of games that are trying to play in this space, and I think some of them are doing a good job of it, and I think some of them are kind of missing the point. So you got to be careful what you do. Remember, when in doubt, make it about the player's choices, make it about agency, and don't be afraid to mechanically interact with it. If you want these things to be important, right? What gets measured gets managed. What gets rewarded gets repeated. All right, everybody. That's going to do it for me. I will see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody.